Hello, good evening, and welcome to the podcast. This is going to be a very strange one. I am very, very tired, having gotten almost no sleep last night, and I didn't even really prepare a talk. Usually, these podcast episodes are supposed to be originally when I conceptualized this podcast, it was going to be an hour and to an hour and a half lecture, followed by a half an hour to an hour of super chats or entropy chats. And the problem is, over the course of the 2 or 3 years I've been doing this podcast has suffered from huge mission creep to the point where last time I did this, I was talking for 5 hours. 5 hours. I didn't even realize how long I had been talking. It totally got away from me just what I was actually doing, what I was talking about, or the course of the lecture, or how long I was spending on actual entropy chats. But tonight, I'm going to do things more or less completely extemporaneously. I have switched over my service from just basically going straight from ODBC to, or OBS, pardon me. That was the database program that I quoted. It shows you how tired I am, right? Straight from OBS to YouTube. Now I'm going to restream. So I can technically be live on Twitter Spaces with the podcast as well as YouTube. And as soon as I figure out how to get the linking right, I will get on to Rumble as well. But that's the plan for tonight, and we're just going to be talking about general things. People have given me a lot of small topics to talk about. I've also been informed by the chat that apparently I'm broadcasting over the State of the Union address. I have this podcast be every other Tuesday night. So this is I want to make my schedule regular. I want to have a monthly basket weaving stream or basket weaving conversation that I can do to build community and discuss various topics about actual community building. Then I want to have my typical podcast, but I can't do this thing where I sometimes I do it every 2 weeks, sometimes I do it every 3 weeks. I feel like I have to get some consistency down. So I just picked Tuesday because it was the one night I kind of had guaranteed for my wife to be able to watch our son together. So this is what you're getting. You're just getting a potpourri on the evening before Mardi Gras. Sorry, Mardi Gras evening, the evening before Ash Wednesday. And thank you for joining me. I do have a variety of things to talk about. I feel like it's the same. It's the same general set of topics that I have been circulating around or circling around for the last several months doing this. And this is the reaction to the vibe shift, because every time I do this, it hits harder. Every time I get on this podcast and talk about these things, I realize that, like, there's this different level of the vibe shift I'm on. And this latest iteration of the vibe shift kind of hitting home, kicking in for me, came when I was observing secondhand, really, this conference called the ARC conference. Now, the ARC conference is it's in the UK, and it's sort of like, I don't know, people have described it as like Davos but for the right. Davos for this is like the new the World Economic Forum, a little get together of their idea leaders, but now we're going to do it from a skeptical point of view, or people who aren't very comfortable with the way the world is going and want a different direction. So of course you had like Yoram Harzoni, Jordan Peterson, of course, the usual suspects with all of the conservative crowd, all meeting together and having these discussions. I forget, there's Mark Andreessen was another one of these people. Mary Harrington, the reactionary feminist, yet a third. You know the crowd, the people who used to be circulating around Steven Pinker and all of the skeptics before they went full progressive are now kind of reemerging on the scene, trying to reevaluate how society is going to run itself in an era where a lot of our liberal myths have kind of fallen by the wayside. And it's funny because really, when I'm looking at this conference, the ARC conference, I'm seeing it through sort of secondhand eyes. I'm seeing clips, but I'm also seeing it through group chats on X. I'm seeing this conference basically be described to me by R.N. McIntyre and Carl Benjamin, both on their Twitter feeds and on their, on the private group chats I'm in, and also coincidentally Benjamin Boyce, who's there as well, and I'm just I'm looking at all these clips, and it's so detached from the world that I occupy. These people are on a 5-year time lapse from us easily. And you think I thought that the vibe shift would hit, and then these people would kind of catch up a little bit. These people would kind of get on our level or start talking in the direction of things that we talk about, and they do talk in the direction of things that we talk about in distant spaces, but then the main thrust of all of their thought is like, how can we toy with these ideas? How can we get these ideas in front of an audience about anti-globalization, the need for reterritorialization, the return of multipolarity, of real power politics, of the fact that modernity is fundamentally corrosive to the human family structure and the human form, the fact that the progressive pieties that we've organized our entire society around are almost all false from a human anthropological point of view. So like we'll acknowledge this like in the abstract, and then we'll, like, the rest of the conversation is going to be kind of this like coping mechanism to kind of like deal with the aftermath and get it back to a comfortable pattern of existence, and something that we're suited to be intellectuals, and to be intellectuals we have to have this thing called discourse going on, called dialectic. And that's the whole reason why I got on YouTube. I got on YouTube to have conversations with people, discourse, dialectic, the exchange of ideas. And for these people, these are mostly ex-academics. These people almost all have academic backgrounds. And then at some point they were defrocked or felt themselves fall on the outside of the mainstay of where modern academia was going inside the Great Awakening progressive era. And but the problem is their discourse, their idea of discourse is talking about ideas in the way that academics talked about them in the 1990s. So the idea in the 1990s, like, your academics, you talk about like certain ideas and sort of TED Talk like venues. You publish a few books with popular thesis statements. Those books get picked up by various mainstream book groups. And then, like, they get passed along to policymakers and politicians who make minor modifications on existing policy and that circulate your ideas into the institution. Uh, this is not what we're talking about right now. It reminded me of an old thing that one of the alt writers from early on said. He said, it's like watching a bunch of people having a conversation, and the biggest conversation, like the most they can possibly imagine. They're talking about computers. They're talking about how to manage their computer. And like the most radical thing they could imagine is like maybe an update from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Like, that's the most they can imagine. And you have to tell these people your computer is going to explode. And so that now we've got them to say like the computer is like heading towards an explosion, but the discourse is still in the mode of like, okay, and that's why we need to upgrade to Windows 10 or 11 or whatever. It's still in the mode of reform. There's no understanding for these people about the kind of changes that are needed. And furthermore, uh, a lot of the intellectual effort is spent on saying, okay, how can we translate these new radical ideas into the way that feels kind of like comfortable from a 1990s academic way of talking about things, like the kind of like meandering, half not very committal, contemplative way where you show that you've considered, you've cogitated, you've worked this over, you're struggling with this difficult idea, and that this is going to become like a consensus. uh yeah, but this is not how this conversation. It has to be something more driven by the desire for radical change. And I don't want to put these people down. I'm listening to Aaron and Carl and Ben talk about these people and talk about this event, and they're very positive on it. In fact, there's a few tweets that come out from Aaron that roughly explain the same emotion that I've been having when looking at various mainstream thinkers, not internalize the lessons of the last 5 years. And but for the most part, he's optimistic, and apparently it's because behind the scenes, people are essentially admitting that we're right about things. Which of course, I don't relish being right about this stuff, because being right without kind of a vision for how this feeling of righteousness actually gets translated into meaningful action, it's just more uselessness. It's just, okay, great, I'm the Cassandra of the world, of the modern apocalypse. I feel very, very special. But so we you get around it to do that, to talking to these people, and sure enough, there look like there's opportunities. It looks like that this could move forward, like these ideas could gain legs at like a deeper level among this alternative elite that's forming up in the wake of the Trump administration. And strangely enough, my friend Ben runs into Rod Dreher, of all people. Now, I probably shouldn't say this because I am kind of relating private messages, and Ben's really intent on getting me to talk to Rod, and I am very intent on talking to Rod Dreher as well. And I said, of course, let's set something up. We're trying to work on a time. We'll see if it works out or if it doesn't. I won't say anything more about the attempt to get a public conversation with Rod Dreher going in the future, which will probably be sometime in April or something like that, if it even happens. That's not really like the emotion I have to this. The emotion I have to this is Rod Dreher for me is an incredibly troublesome character for me to process internally, just based on my history of who I am and where I'm really situated, and just this kind of the vibe shift that I'm experiencing right now. I honestly, like, if I had this offer 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this would have been like one of the highlights of my channel. To get to talk to Rod Dreher would have been one of the highlights of my entire YouTube career. It would have been one of the most memorable experiences I had as a blogger or a content creator. And I would have just jumped at it, and I would have been able to write a volume of words about the experience, or feelings going into it, or questions I wanted to ask him. I have no idea what to say to this guy in 2025. Originally I had encountered Rod Dreher in, good Lord, was it 2007? 2007, 2008, which was, this was, it's really weird because 2008 was the height of my progressive enthusiasm for democratic politics. I was volunteering, going out for Barack Obama. I was a huge anti-Bush person. But it was also the point where I had kind of realized that my whole atheism, secularist thing that I had adopted through late high school and early college was just absolute bullshit. I had kind of come through Platonism to believe in a deistic God. And I was looking around with great interest to things like Quakerism and other forms of Christianity. I had some evangelical friends that I really liked, but the cultural disconnect between me and these evangelicals was radical. These people filled all of the stereotypes of Bush era evangelicals, like the happy, clappy winsomeness, the cultural overconfidence, the never say die kind of American attitude that was altogether Whiggish. And this just did not correspond to any of the emotions I was having leaving secularism, which were decidedly more reactionary. I wouldn't have used those words back then, even though I think, oddly enough, I had come across Yarvin's Old Mencius Molebug Unqualified Reservation blog in the process of this search. And I discovered Rod Dreher at Oh, I don't even remember where he was writing for originally. Was it that blog Get Religion, perhaps? There was this religious blog that wanted to centralize religious conversations. It was a big thing because the reason, Democrats felt that they had lost 2004 largely because of religious voters. And so, just as there's a huge effort afoot right now to find the replacement for Joe Rogan, there was a huge effort afoot with blogosphere types to organize a religious discourse. And Rod Dreher was on the site and he wrote a blog and he had written a book called Crunchy Conservatives. And the idea, like, it was just like perfect for me. It was like, it was saying, we're going to take the older elements of Catholicism and we're going to take, the liturgical stuff, the stuff that everyone resonates with on a deep cultural level. And when you see the cathedrals and the smells and bells of the traditional mass, when you look at the spires and the old religious art of the Renaissance masters, you're just filled. If you're anything like me, or if you're anything like most people from a European heritage, filled with this sudden swell of emotion and groundedness, and you don't know how to connect that to anything you experience in your real world as this disconnected modern person who has to, put numbers in a machine and operate on HR guidelines every day. And, Roger was like, okay, we're going to take this traditional apostolic Christianity and we're going to combine it with modern apologetics and, maybe some, somewhat liberal political priorities. This was, after all, the age of Obama. Everyone was trying to incorporate this center left political priorities into their vision. And then we're also going to match this orthodox, liturgy with a conservative social morality, maybe a liberal political persuasion. And then on top of that, and this is the cherry on top, or maybe it was the entire top of the sundae. On top of that, it's going to be crunchy. Now, no one knows like what word crunchy means anymore. This word crunchy, it sounds it sounds weird saying crunchy in the year of our Lord 2025. But back in the day, the word for hippie, and now we use soy to symbolize sort of left wing modes of life. But this is to kind of express what it was. And what does soy represent? Soy represents softness, highly processed food. It's not, I mean, it is there's ways you can produce soy and soy products in a highly organic way, and certainly many Asian societies do just that. But when we consume soy in the modern world, it is usually in highly processed forms, and it's usually as a replacement for some other protein source. And as such, it is a substandard replacement for a more organic protein source that may or may not cause you to shed testosterone generating, your body's testosterone generating capacities, which leads to the soy being correlated with this effeminate bug man who's addicted to these modern contrived highly processed dopamine treats that they constantly ingest. Like, soy is the symbol of the left. But you see, in 2008, soy was not the symbol of the left. Granola was the symbol of the left. And what is granola? Granola is essentially a replacement for breakfast cereals, but it's made out of all natural products, and it is less processed than the stuff that you get from Kellogg's. And it's usually eaten, you can get unhealthy granola bars that have lots of sugar in them, but it's usually eaten with very little sugar in granola or in some other kind of like salad, so that you get like a wholesome, earth-based, organic way of dealing with of getting food, of getting real food. And this was the era of Michael Pollan, and Michael Pollan was sort of the person who's trying to build the bridge between technocratic yuppieism and sort of the hippie food culture that existed. And of course, I don't even need to tell you where Michael Pollan is from. He's obviously from the East. Well, I don't even know that. I guess I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure I'm right when I say Michael Pollan, the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, was from the East Bay of the U.S. He was, Berkeley, Walnut Creek. Maybe he was from Palo Alto, which I guess is technically West Bay, but it's just one bridge ride away, and one football rivalry, the other side of the major football rivalry in the area. But of course, this is the era of organic food and whole foods and locally grown. And this is the original early millennial, late Gen X foodie culture. We've completely lost this. And I think that's so horribly ironic that we've completely lost this whole drive towards foodie culture during the Great Awakening, because it was shown to be an insufficient way to grasp at some kind of religious motivation. But sure enough, that this was the image that Rod Dreher had picked out, the crunchy conservative. And yeah, I mean, this is like music to my ears, like this vision of a new Christianity that could incorporate the best of all elements of my cultural upbringing and my desire to be a good technocrat, and also my desire for deeper spiritual fulfillment. And as I'm reading Rod Dreher, he becomes like this enormous influence in my life. Like, I'm amazed I didn't convert to Orthodoxy. Uh, and maybe it was just because there weren't any I don't remember any Orthodox churches in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and so it's just, I guess, and I didn't really, I examined it a little bit, but I considered it kind of to be immaterial, and kind of this. I deeply believe in the apostolic claim of the Catholic Church, and when I read about that from other authors, I kind of just decided that Catholicism was the seat of Saint Peter, and made no more of it. But no, that being said, Rod Dreher, his own religious history, I believe, was he was some kind of evangelical Christian that went to Catholicism, and then in the wake of the scandals, he moved to Orthodoxy in the wake of the sex abuse scandals. He was actually one of the reporters that broke it. And so I'm reading his books. I read, the original book, Crunchy Conservatives. I believe there are several others that I read of his. I read the one on Dante, which didn't have anything to do with Dante. I read the book about his family life and his sister, which, I didn't even know what to make of that. And then, of course, this is all building towards this magnum opus that Rod Dreher is promising, called the Benedict option. And the Benedict option is, in my mind, kind of the image that Rod Dreher is most famous for putting across. And it was taken from Alistair MacIntyre, the very famous ex-communist convert to Christianity, who goes from being kind of a materialist to embracing a kind of Aristotelian view of the world, and then writing a book in the wake of this conversion called After Virtue, in which he essentially describes, well, what we would call modernity here, deconstructing the idea of an autonomous, real, felt virtue or morality in society. And how we've completely instrumentalized this, and now our language is fundamentally divested of these moral questions in a way that we can't really conceive of. And I guess, and you could certainly say that things like Machiavelli, started this ball rolling. But of course, it didn't really hit until we got into the materialistic world. And Alistair MacIntyre, after the end of writing this great book about how modern moral perspectives they wouldn't be considered moral from the perspective of a non-modern or pre-modern person. He says, well, I don't really know what the solution to this is, because all of the systems that we have to fix the solution are infested with the exact same problem that we see in the current space. And so his solution is, oh, well, he just alludes to this. We need to rediscover the tradition of Saint Benedict. Now, Roger Dreher takes this, and his idea is, well, it would broadly be what we would call parallelism in the modern era. This is I don't know how much this is an idea because it's years between when he starts talking about this and when he actually writes the book, The Benedict Option. I mean, it's so far away that it goes from 2008, which is roughly, I think 2008, 2010, that's when he starts talking about the Benedict option, to then being around 2016, 2017, I have already started my blog, well after my reversion or conversion to Catholicism. I was already well into my YouTube channel career when the Benedict option comes out. And by that time he's kind of talked about this endlessly. And the problem, I mean, it's a fine book, and by all means read it. But it was entirely unsuited for where people were, where certainly I was in my spiritual and political development. Uh, this is, Rod Dreher says that there is a crisis. Rod Dreher says that the Christianity we know is disintegrating around our feet, and that something radically different is needed. And boy, did we see that in 2017. I mean, we've been feeling it from 2017 till now, when the vibe shift has hit in earnest. But the ball really started rolling around that, and I'm here waiting for the call to action, the way to organize, the way to take a step forward. And it's just, Rod Dreher just kind of redescribes the problem. And I don't want to blame Dreher for that. I mean, people argue that that's more or less what I do on this channel is describe the problems. And oftentimes all you can do is kind of describe what you're saying and then kind of poke at solutions on the side and see if any stick. But what Dreher was discussing is like this overarching organized reaction to modernity in a way that would really require a bunch of convicted people who were elites to take decisive action, like Saint Benedict did, and kind of move to a mode that was fundamentally simpler and fundamentally more connected to the core moral precepts of the Christian faith. The problem was, um, okay, like I said that there. I gave you the rundown, and you're thinking probably that this is the dust jacket version of the Benedict option idea. It's really not. The book and Rod Dreher's conversations on this subsequently have been almost entirely abstract, and have been completely removed from politics or real politics as we would understand them. And so people who were huge fans of his and we're just waiting for kind of directions about organizing, about next steps, about where we're going to go. We're just kind of left feeling like, okay, now we have this, but okay, this is what I've been getting on the blog for the last 3 years. And Dreher's blog was largely just documenting the problems of modernity. I mean, it was well written and it was consistently updated, and Dreher is a good writer, but it was impossible to notice. I mean, this people accused Dreher of this, even his fans accused him of doing this. That all he was doing was taking like the latest outrage of the week and then like clutching pearls, clutching pearls about how horrible it is that like this new outrage has happened and how far we have fallen as a Christian society and blah 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 blah. This is and okay, so great. So now we're waiting for the Benedict option. We have the Benedict option, and the blog isn't going to tell us how to build the Benedict option. It's going to continue to go around in circles, talking about the latest outrage of the week, and then clutching the pearls around it. Which, of course, as the Great Awakening was spinning up, predictably, Rod Dreher even predicted this. It was no difficulty finding outrage stories. As a matter of fact, half of conservative influencers adopted Dreher's model of this outrage peddling. Now, there is another huge falling out between, but by that time, I should say, and the intermediary portion is that by that time, I get to be a fairly substantial blogger in my own right and start trying to dip my toes into building communities and saying how this whole commentary and discourse thing would work for the first time with myself in the pilot, and and it, you kind of see immediately. I guess there's a big difference, right? I don't want to do this the Rod Dreher thing. I don't want to. Uh, Rod Dreher was a huge critic of liberalism, of modernity, of progressive ideas, of secular ideas, but he wasn't really in conversation with people who had these ideas. He wasn't talking to anyone. As a matter of fact, a blogger that I discovered at roughly the same time as him, Ross Douthat, who wrote for the blog of the Atlantic Monthly and then was subsequently in 2009 employed at the New York Times, he was much better. Douthat was much better at actually trying to approach people, talk to convinced liberals and mainstream secularists, and try to get them at least to see the perspectives of Christianity. But with Rod, there never was a dialectic. There was just like this weird cycle, like this weird imaginary dialectic we were having with each other. Well, we were trying to convince ourselves that yes, modernity is bad. Yeah, that's why I started reading your blog, but now we're on like year 5 and we're still doing this like modernity is bad, and the question is discourse. The whole reason why I started my channel was to engage in discourse. I wanted to engage in discourse because I remember the night that I had like a blog where I published like little mini articles while I was doing my PhD as a hobby. But I remember that the absolute point where I was like, I need to make this bigger. I need to actually engage with the discourse as it's going on online. And that's when I saw several of the debates that Sargon of Akkad or my friend Carl Benjamin had with a variety of other people. And I felt, first of all, I was always impressed with Carl because I felt that he was a noble spirit. And it was like the little things, right? Because I had kind of this very dismissive attitude to online atheists like TJ Kirk and Devin Stack. Was Devin Tracy, the kangaroo guy. I can't remember. Is too many Devins. Can't remember who's the black pill guy and who's the kangaroo. Devin Tracy is the kangaroo guy, right? And I was always listening to these anti-SJW atheists and thinking, man, these guys, they're getting what they signed up for with this SJW, social justice warrior stuff. Like they signed up for secular man, and now they don't like what they're getting. They're caught flat-footed. Now they're reaping the whirlwind. And sure, I'll listen to their takedowns of feminism because they're funny. But I'm not sitting around there going like, oh man, I need to talk reason into Devin Tracy. Oh man, if only I could catch the ear of TJ Kirk. I know what TJ Kirk is thinking. TJ Kirk is a complete nihilist. I'm sorry if you didn't realize that until very recently, like after COVID. But I knew who I was looking at. I grew up with people like that. These people are not, people like TJ Kirk are not thoughtful people. These people are very solipsistic and very shallow thinkers, that they like hearing themselves talk, they like being right, and they fastened on the issue of their age, which was evangelicals are making it harder for me to basically pleasure myself online and off. And I need to get really, really angry about this and then invent a career about myself getting really, really angry online. And I originally I saw Sargon, I'm okay, this guy's a better spoken version of these other anti-JW or people. But then I slowly realized that Carl was actually a much different kind of animal. He was genuinely grappling with a crisis in ideology that had occurred in Gamergate. The model of the end of history had dissolved. He had walked off the map like I had in a little earlier, several years earlier, right around the time I discovered Rod Dreher. And he was now struggling with trying to figure out what to do. He was wise. He was humble enough to admit that he had lost the debate. I'm sorry, that immediately, like when you were like, oh, I lost that debate. And so my first video was like, okay, my mission of this channel is to find people like Sargon. And I never thought I'd actually talk to Sargon because he was like, he was a big fish and I was very small today. My channel is to discourse with these people and show them the problems with modernity, with the course that we're on, with all of these liberal presuppositions that we've adopted through our secular worldview. That was the mission of my channel. It was discourse, and I'm thinking, well, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this just because I can complain about things and go on in a cycle indefinitely. And if I get to 5 years and I'm still making the same video talking about the problems again and again and again of modernity, I don't know. I'll find another hobby. I'll do something else. And fast forward 10 years, I mean, the project was a success in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, these people there were an enormous number of people that did start listening and noticing the larger problems that were going on, not just in gaming, but everywhere. And furthermore, that these problems pointed to a much more foundational, and I wouldn't have used this term with Carl previously, but a fundamental spiritual crisis. We had to, I think, I don't know if Carl would still be resistant or to saying spiritual, because I think he's still agnostic, but the problems of modernity have to do with an attitude we take in our spirits towards ideas, the ideas pertaining to truth, goodness, and beauty, like Alistair McIntyre pointed out. And until that core problem is at least addressed in part, all we have done is kind of layered kind of false solutions over it. But I should say, like, the whole point of this, the whole point of me doing the blog was to essentially engage in discourse. And it changed over the years. It changed over the years. In 2018, 2019, the left started engaging in discourse in a big way, and it seemed, okay, maybe this is a totally open space. Then in 2020, they just nuked conversation everywhere in the wake of COVID, and you couldn't meaningfully talk to anybody. And so the only thing you were left doing, the only people who were listening, were kind of centrists and boomer cons, and that lasted. It lasted for 2 years, and that was more or less the conversations we've been having since 2022. I don't know where to take this anymore, and we have reached sort of the end. But it's funny because insofar, so people, I ask every day, like, what do you want me to talk about on this live stream? What do you want me to talk about? What? And people always say, like, they always either give me like yes or no questions. Like, do you think this is true? Yes. Do you think that's false? No. That's great. I'll answer for you if it comes, if I see it pop up on Twitter, or if it's one of the entropy chats at the end, but it's not a topic to talk about. And the other common one is like, talk about the current events. Well, okay, I mean, the current events, what happened in the last 2 weeks? Well, I mean, the current events are the same current events that have been going on for the last 2 or 3 months, which is Trump is doing things. Trump is doing things. This is an interesting spectator sport. I mean, right now, as we're speaking, Trump is speaking to Congress. And I assume that what's going to come out of this are even more things that will be done in terms of direction for the country and direction for the world. And this is good. I mean, in some sense, it's optimistic in the sense that it looks like Trump has internalized enough of the lessons that he's not going to be another Ronald Reagan. That much is clear. Now, is that enough? Is that enough to completely remake the American government? I don't know. But if you look at the news items, what is it? It's like the tariff came today. There was a huge brouhaha over Gaza. There is a huge brouhaha over Canada. Well, I guess that's an extension of the tariffs, right? And most notably, the one that really ruffled everyone's feathers was Trump's arguments with Zelensky. which is kind of this bizarre conversation that erupted in the Oval Office, where I don't know, like people say, oh, Zelensky wasn't trying to disrespect Trump and JD Vance. That's just how Slavs are. If you're part of a country whose entire future depends on the beneficence of a Western country, it might behoove one to understand what comes off as being condescending and aggressive. I understand that Slavic countries have very curt speaking styles, but you know what Zelensky did was just disastrous. He got into this argument with Trump and Vance, which I have to imagine must be staged. I can't imagine that you let leaders on a hot mic and not have a scripted interaction, because you know, it made I don't think Trump or JD Vance looked particularly strong. It looked like they I mean you don't want Trump and JD Vance don't want to I mean Ukraine is our client state. You don't argue with your client, you just tell them what to do. And of course, there are arguments, just like there are arguments inside a family or arguments inside a marriage, but you don't broadcast that to the outside world. Putin must have been laughing his ass off at this interaction, because basically you had Trump and JD Vance just completely put Zelensky in his place. I mean, if this was just interpersonal and not Machiavellian, from an interpersonal point of view, he deserved to be put in this place because he was absolutely out of line from where he sat. But the takeaway here is that there's a radically different policy that's going on in Europe. J.D. Vance gave a speech in Germany, which basically questioned the whole post-war political perspectives. No, that's fine. We can't, like, there's not discourse. Like, this is all I could tell you this is happening. But this is about as relevant to us as like a hurricane hitting us. I mean, a hurricane's relevant. If a hurricane were to hit Victoria, where I currently live, I wonder if that's actually ever happened. We're not really in Hurricane Alley. I would imagine there's been some horrible hurricane-like typhoons that have hit this region, although that would be highly unlikely. But it would be a relevant thing. It might even change my life. It would cause a huge amount of damage, and I'd have to take time off of work. I'd have internet down for weeks. Hopefully none of my family would. It would be very, very relevant. I couldn't do anything about that weather event happening. And the same thing is true with all of these Trump war actions. We can't do anything about this at this stage. The die is cast. The decision and the discourse happened in October and November, and perhaps a little bit leading up to this moment when the Trump administration was forming and still susceptible to the discourse on Twitter, which it still is a little bit. In this mode where they're doing a different thing every day, I really doubt any of the big movers and shakers have much time to listen. This stuff has all been pre-planned, and it's rolling out very, very quickly so they can get a totally new agenda into place. No, we have to react to it. We have to see what this is and react to these circumstances. But the die is cast, and there's no real point debating over how Trump. Like, I could say a million things about the Trump Zelensky thing, right? It looks weak on Trump's part. Zelensky deserved it. Ukraine needs to be put in its place and brought to the negotiating table one way or the other. I can't imagine this was the most efficient way to do that. But in the meantime, even though Trump is looks a little bit weak doing this, it doesn't look as weak as what Zelensky pulled off. And I think that his political career is very rapidly disintegrating. I think that this whole pretense of the Ukrainian war is kind of collapsing before our very eyes, and hopefully we'll be able to stop the bloodshed. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not, in all of these Trump war things, I'm not looking for, what Trump's doing. Like that, again, he decided he was going to do this months ago. And to the extent that he listens to us, which is not insignificant, he's operating on those ideas that he read about or heard about or were suggested to him that occurred months and months ago. He is in complete executive decision-making mode right now, and unless you have a window onto the Oval Office or are able to walk into him in a conference, the idea that you're going to put an idea in his brain by having a conversation about that stuff is pretty unlikely. What is interesting is how people are talking about this, which is, I mean, this is what kills me. No, I don't really. I'm not the biggest tariff person. I think that these ideas are kind of. I think that he should focus on dismantling immigration rather than trying to install tariffs as a revenue generating feature. I think the revenue generation should come last. The revenue generation should only be generated once he's completely consolidated his control over the government. And the only tariffs he should be introducing right now are punitive. I also think, and this is meaningless, like I said, no one's listening to me. I'm just giving you my opinion. I also think that the rhetoric, while necessary, it's way too much broadsword and way too little scalpel. These European leaders needed to be quietly shivved in the back, and with the hand over their mouth, and they're doing the whole Hannibal Lecter shh 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 as like they bleed out. Encouraged to die quietly. Instead, the Trump administration is taking a battle axe to these guys, and they're trying to go after them in the sloppiest way imaginable. And of course, it's not pretty. It looks uncontrolled. And so I'm sitting here, and that's, look, European leaders, the bureaucrats need to go. The bureaucrats need to go. Keir Starmer needs to go. The government of Germany needs to go. The government of France needs to go. Brussels needs to go. All of these politicians need to be moved out, and a new class of politicians need to be moved in as quickly as possible. It is over. That has to be the message. Everyone knows this. Everyone in our circles knows this. Everyone in Canada knows this. And I talk to Canadian conservatives. I talk to reactionaries online, and you get people, and they're pissed because they feel rightfully so that Trump is being weak in the eyes of Putin. Sure, I don't like Putin. I don't want him to devour Ukraine. I mean, I guess it's inevitable that he certainly will devour part of it in order to stop the bloodshed. And he certainly can't be allowed to conquer half of Europe the way that the USSR did. But if you're a European, a Western European right now, and in your right wing, like you care about the future of your people, this is your time. This is a window opportunity, and Putin is evil, and the incursion into Eastern Europe by the Russians is scary. It unlocks a lot of historical animosities. You got to use this opportunity to get rid of the bureaucrats. This is your chance. This is when they're weak. This is when they're weak. They've never been weaker than now. They've never been weaker than now. Their time is over. And you have to be focused like a laser to get rid of the center-right and center-left parties in Europe. They have to go. And the primary national parties have to become majoritarian parties or part of a ruling coalition. And mass migration writ large, has to be put on the table as a permanent political issue. And hopefully with an eye towards phasing it out entirely as an inevitable conclusion of its reality as a political issue. That's got to be your objective. That has to be your objective. I see all these Europeans complaining about the United States being mean, complaining about their fears about Russia. That's not immediate. What you have on your table right now is the avenue to get rid of the bureaucrats. This is the time that they are vulnerable. And I include here the Canadians too. Like, oh my God, all the conservatives here. Oh man, America is going to invade and turn us into the 51st state. That's so disrespectful. You're being replaced by the present government of Canada. Do anything. Use this as an opportunity to get rid of the Liberal Party, to get rid of Trudeau, get rid of all of his successors. Completely destroy that party. Use it. Use this time. Laser focus your efforts. That's the only thing that matters. This stuff with like America invading Canada, this is never going to happen. but it's like this comfortable mode. It's this comfortable like boomer way of talking about like I'm not American, I'm Canadian. Didn't you know that? Like I've got this totally traditional maple leaf red maple leaf flag on my shirt. I'm Canadian. And this is the one thing Canadians have in common. They just can't get over the fact they can't stop any opportunity to remind people that they're not Americans. They'll take it. This is the one thing that unifies the boomer Canadians with the boomer libs is that they'll never miss an opportunity to remind you that they're not American. Didn't you know I was Canadian? Yeah, I got that. All right. Yeah. Didn't you notice that you imported 5% of your entire population from India in the last 2 years? I noticed that. Oh yeah, I noticed that. But there's nothing you can do about that. Uh, well, I mean, there might be. That might matter a lot more. And all the while I have to argue with these people, and I do this every. It's so funny because my in-laws are like the classic Fox News watching red staters, except they're Canadian, and my American family are like the typical. I wouldn't say that they're Bay Area progressives because that implies they're very radical and they're much more like Hillary Clinton. Kamala Harris would be a good example of their general persuasion. Uh, and the conversations go the exact same way. The conversations always go the exact same way. I can't convince my my boomer Republican, not my boomer Canadian conservative relatives that Israel is not their number one priority. They're like the Israel is the most important thing in the world is to make sure that Israel wins its wars. And you can walk them through this. You can walk them through this. And the most important thing is that we kill more Russians in Ukraine. Like why? Why? I mean, and you're being displaced in your own country. Oh, we can't do anything about that. That's just the way things are. That's just the way things are. That's just the way things are. Uh, sure. I mean, when you're conducting a ethnic cleansing of a country thousands of miles away, you can't even control the borders of your own island. Yeah, and the same thing's true. It's identical. It's identical on the side of the progressives. And now it's all like Putin. We need to fight Putin to the last man. Like in the name of democracy, in the name of our sacred secular progressive democracy that is represented by the Kamala Harris, who should have won. And we need to make sure that we kill another 3 million Russians at the expense of every single life in Ukraine. And it's because they wanted it. It's because they wanted it. The Ukrainians want to die fighting the Russians. We're just letting them do it. And we're giving them all of the currency and all of the weapon systems so that they can die fighting the Russians indefinitely. Uh, and the problem is that I guess it's a little less apparent for the parents, because with the parents you can never really be too on the nose with relatives. You're always kind of talking around. You're always kind of waiting for a moment to kind of like suggest they look into something like, oh, really? There's a Jewish state. Well, where's your state? Where's your Israel? And then they get flat. Well, I don't know. I don't know where. I wish we had. I wish we did have an Israel. I wonder where that one. Like, wasn't this country your Israel? Why are you losing it? You offer like little questions on the side because you don't want to nuke your relationships with these people. And the same thing but you could just walk them into contradictions, and then they won't be able to answer them. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on forever. And I did this poll this last week where I polled the audience for 24 hours and I said, where is the real discourse on X? Is it with the left? Is it with fellow members of the right wing? Is it with the boomers, the boomer centrists, or is discourse dead? And not surprisingly, people think that discourse with the left is completely dead. And I agree with him. I have no idea what a coherent moderate left wing position even looks like right now. I see people like Nathan Robinson and Ben Burgess and Matt McManus, who are my three favorite leftists to argue with on X. And it's just this pile of incoherence, one after the other. They can't even decide whether they're socialists or social democrats or communists or Marxists. They just they swap out the titles interchangeably when the time comes to like I assume they just use like socialist and then use that to mean various different things whenever they're trying to appear to be centrist de-radicalizers against the scary right-wing menace, or when they're trying to shore up their credentials as being truly radical themselves. They'll just, oh, I'm a socialist. And socialism can mean anything. Socialism can be Sweden. Socialism can be Canada. Socialism can be the USSR, or it can be nothing. It can be nothing but the Paris Commune and a few intentional communities in Spain in the 1930s. No one knows it's socialism. It's the perfect thing. There's no coherence there, so I'm not surprised no one is. And then on the left, too, you have like Destiny and Vosh and Hassan Piker, like the debate bros. Like everyone knows, like they just make stuff up. Like there's no coherent opinion there. There's no ideas. And and eventually, you know, I guess the thing is that, far and away this poll when I ran it, obviously no one wants to debate the left. In the right wing, it feels pointless and needlessly divisive. The discourse, in order to be useful, so like the discourse I have with pagans or whatever, it has to be online. It has to be private for it to be at all useful. And then you're spending all this time doing private discourse when there's really no, there's really like it doesn't feel very generative at all. By and far, the most popular people that they felt needed to get pushed back on were like the boomers, like the boomer conservatives specifically, like the Joel Berrys, the Local Distances, the Neil Shenvis, the James Lindsays. These are the people that want the people really feel there's discourse with right now. I don't think so. I have done the tour of boomer discourse. I've done them all. I've done them all. I've done Vocal Distance twice. I've done Joel Berry. I've done Neil Shenvi. I didn't even think I'd ever be able to talk to him. And it's all variations of the same thing. It's basically like you're right about all these observations, but it's not that bad, and everything is going to be restored to normalcy imminently. And in the meantime, here are some comforting platitudes that about things that aren't real but should be real. But because something Christians shouldn't concern themselves about what's real. They should only ever talk about what the ideal situation is. This is just so. And the problem here is I don't know what even to say in this. The last one I think was the conversation with Joel Berry. And Joel Berry, throughout the entire last half of our conversation, was just saying, without Christianity, we have nothing. Without Christianity, America is done for. America needs to reconceptualize itself on Christian grounds. Christian, 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 blah, 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 blah. You get the routine, right? And this is perfect, right? Because it is absolutely true. It is absolutely something that I believe in. And all my caveats are essentially objections about realism. Like, Joel, we're no longer a Christian country. Do you realize how much Christianity has declined in the last 40 years? Do you understand how de-Christianized we've become in the last 40 years? Oh, no, Dave. No, you're panicking. You're panicking. And with God, all things are possible. Like, this is kind of like hand-wavy things used to dismiss all forms of realism. We should just pretend like our country is 100% Christian, and then through our faith it will become Christian through and Donald Trump won. So we're back to being a 90% Christian country now that Donald Trump won. That's apparently what this election was about. But yeah, Joel doesn't Joel doesn't believe these things. I mean, Joel doesn't believe these things. I mean, I'm sure he believes in God. I'm not questioning his Christianity. But then a week later, Vivek Ramaswamy tweets out, America is not about religion. America is not about blood or heritage. America is not about soil. America is about ideals. Ideals like patriotism, ideas like excellence, ideas like meritocracy. That's what this country was founded on. And Joel Berry's like, truth, truth, Vivek, truth. It's all about excellence and meritocracy and patriotism. What happened to Christianity, Joel? What happened? You wasted an hour of my, I mean, I didn't waste an hour of my time, but I spent an hour listening to you talk my ear off about how if America didn't have Christianity at its center, it was done for. Now you're here endorsing somebody who's trying to become the prospective leader of this country, saying that religion, blood, and ethnicity and land have nothing to do with what it means to be an American. What creates Americanness is a vague allusion to Enlightenment values that aren't even well defined, and it could only be possibly defined in light of religious values. So, Joel, does Vivek share your values? Is he a Christian? No, obviously. I mean, if a guy stood up and said, "I want Islamic patriotism, I want Islamic meritocracy, I want Islamic excellence," would Joel Berry be like, "Oh yes, that's exactly what it means to be an American"? Okay, so apparently, Hindu meritocracy, Hindu excellence, Hindu patriotism is what America is based on. If there's one thing we've learned over the last 10 years, I mean, we should have learned this. These platitudinous appeals to abstract Enlightenment ideas only make sense if you have a common religious value system that grounds them to a consistent definition. If they're not used to represent a consistent definition of value, they could represent anything you wanted them to. They could represent Hindu values, they could represent Muslim values, they could represent atheist progressivism values. They're just words. You can redefine the word to be whatever you mean. And there's no consistent definition. Oh, does racism have a consistent definition? Does racism have a consistent definition, Joel? I mean, we did this. Oh, no, there was an objective definition that was developed in the early 20th century before the communists got a hold of it in the 70s. And this is the objective definition of racism. And it's still bad, and Christians should still break themselves talking about whether people are racist or not. Okay, great, Joel. So are the founding fathers racist or not? Flatline. And the only way that he can claim that the founding fathers weren't racist is by, you guessed it, changing the definition of racist so that it's a different definition applying to people in the 18th century than as it applies in the 21st century. Because, I mean, you can find people that have Thomas Jefferson's views of race in the 21st century. It's Jared Taylor. He's even a Virginian. It's very clear that you can find people who have these values in the 21st century. That is absolutely something that can be procured. And of course, does Joel Berry think that Jared Taylor is a representation of American excellence and patriotism? Of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't, because that's scary racism and needs to be obliterated. The problem is it's not. I guess the other thing too is like it's the Andrew Tate thing. For weeks we've done this thing, right? Where Andrew Tate apparently beats the rap in Romania. I can't remember if he had help from the Trump administration. I think the Trump removed a travel ban or something like that. Uh, you know, the travel ban was reversed. Now he's an American. Of course, every evangelical is freaking the F out. And everybody in my seat is sitting here and we're looking at like the evangelical conservative boomer cons freak out over Andrew Tate. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, great. You're freaking out over this guy. He's only popular because you failed. I don't think people understand. Like, do people Do evangelicals realize what an opportunity they've missed over the last 10 years with white men? What does I don't think they really have. I mean, there was such an opportunity that was young white men in particular are starving for mentorship and for development and for people who believe that they have their collective interests at heart and for people who can acknowledge the reality of what has happened. Now, and that's essential. I mean, there's two components, and obviously, Christian leaders will say, "Well, we mentor our children. We have youth groups, we have all these pastoral things, we have church plantings. Come and we'll mentor you to be like us." Yeah. Okay. So why does and then they're mystified about why Tate sells better. Tate does not sell better than Christianity. Christianity would sell better than Tate. Zoomer men are looking for two things. They're looking for two things. The first thing they're looking for is they're looking for an acknowledgement of the decline, specifically an acknowledgement of the decline of their economic prospects and their increased difficulty with women in the dating market. This is essentially what an acknowledgement of that reality is necessary. Because other than that, because what they don't want to hear is they don't want to hear like grind yourself into dust, trying to run into the wall of an economic problem again and again and again so that you can LARP as how things were like for me in the 90s or the 80s. That's what they want to hear. They want an acknowledgement that things have actually declined. The second thing they want to hear is they want to hear some similar embracing of a collective identity that you share in common, that you share in common in particular with them, that extends beyond what you have to everyone in the rest of the world, right? It can't be like, oh, yes, I have a commonality with you, just the same as I have, for someone, a refugee that's trying to enter this country. Now, no, that doesn't work. What they're looking for is I'm looking for a collective identity for which I can express my collective interests and my desire to fix a systematic problem. If you give men both of these things, if you say like if you show a consistent understanding of collective politics and an acknowledgement of the problem, like your Andrew Tate problems would be over like the next day. No one would accuse you of no one would look at you and see like, oh, you were kind of the defenders of the status quo. You were kind of the enemies of the young white men who are trying to deal with problems that just did not exist in 1998. This is, but those components have to be there and consistently. This is what modern Christian leaders refuse to give young men. And these are things that Christian leaders would routinely give to young men in times past. What I laid out right there, the acknowledgement of the decline and the acknowledgement of the collective political interest, they don't even have to support the collective political interest. They just have to acknowledge that it exists and that their identity is proper and good to pursue at a political level, and not counter signal it as evil Nazism or to pat themselves on the back because they don't need it. Those things were things that Christian leaders were perfectly capable of allowing men to have in times past. Now they don't. And we know why they don't. And this is what kills me. And that you'll see this too, like the most popular response to young men complaining about their economic conditions in the present year from a lot of these Christian leaders is to essentially give them the man up lecture. And look, granted, these young Zoomers need to man up, but you need to earn that lecture. You can't come out of nowhere. And you see the pictures of these pastors that deliver the man up. You kids are so entitled. You are so whiny. All you do is complain. Why don't you go marry a woman and start a job or something like that? That's usually what it's like. And you see these guys, they've got the 6 kids. They got the beautiful wife. They have the SUV and the nice house, and young guys are looking at this and thinking, there is no way that level of opportunity is available to me. I can't go to college and get a communications degree and then get a salary that attracts a wife and in a community that supports me as like a pastor and gives me enough money to buy like two sports utility vehicles. So this opportunity is not available to me. And giving me this lecture about manning up, it makes me feel deeply alienated, and it also looks deeply sort of effeminate in a way, because I don't I don't no one believes for a second that if these guys were in the situation of a lot of Zoomers, that they wouldn't have tons of problems. Like, I see some of the Christian leaders posting, trying to dunk on these Zoomers for being lazy and for being, for being degenerate and for complaining too much. And the pastors, like, how can I put this gently? Like, they're portly guys with like these really thick glasses and like, and the blonde beards and like the double chins, and you're just thinking to yourself, I can totally imagine the kind of guy you were in your 20s, and you were not a guy that would just be killing it in the dating market. You would have had a very, very, very difficult time finding the kind of success you had in the 90s now. And like, I can't divorce that from my mind. And I guess, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? Obviously, I did get the wife, I did get the job. I have a reasonable blogging career here that I'm very, very happy about. But that's not what really kills me. What really kills me is the fact that I have to have this conversation over and over and over again. I'm uninterested in having this conversation over and over again because I think they know this stuff already. They'll post these. I mean, the reason why they like reacting against Andrew Tate by yelling at his young male following, as opposed to, and I even wrote out, when one pastor wrote out one of these condescending man up speeches, I literally rewrote it for him. I just rewrote it and I said, just say this instead. Say something like, "Friend, I know times are tough. I know your generation has it worse than any other generation has before it. I know that the dating market has been completely destroyed, but we can fight this together with the help of God. And don't pay attention to Andrew Tate. He is not a genuine believer. He's just trying to cash in on you. And if you follow instead, the path of Jesus Christ, and we can work together to address these systematic problems. And while I can't guarantee you'll have great success or wealth, you'll have more value where it matters. And and to the extent that any of my fortunes can be put to the end of fixing the problems that you see every day, we'll fight this together collectively." If you just said that, like, the problems would be over. But that's not the speech you get. You get again and again and again and again. Man up. You online right wingers are losers. You don't know what it is. We've succeeded and you haven't. So and so. It's just dumping on these guys in their 20s that are having a hard time again and again and again. No acknowledgement of the systematic problems that are driving this. No acknowledgement of the broader issues that or appeal that Andrew Tate has, because you've essentially granted him the power of truth to be the only person that points to the issues in the modern world in a way that feels realistic. And you can see why they're doing this. They're doing this because whenever they have one of these speeches, it's not that they get a lot of retweets. They oftentimes get ratioed. But I've noticed the kinds of people that retweet them. I don't know how to put this in so many words, but this is this is the message that almost all Christian women think should be given to men. I have not figured this out yet, but there seems to be this incredible sensitivity to, I don't know, the problem is like these women, a lot of women, they have families. They are not progressives. They are conservatives. They acknowledge all of the problems. If we were to just kind of like push pause, just push pause, no emotions. Has the dating market declined? Yes. Have women's and men's behaviors online gotten significantly worse? Yes. Does this have consequences for young men? Yes. Are young men's economic prospects worse? Yes. Like they'll say all of that. But the second you communicate in the way that I just did, where you acknowledge the collective problem and you acknowledge the 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 collective need to address the system's problems from the perspective of young men being disadvantaged. A whole swath of female female content consumers, a huge percentage of the female audience feels very, very threatened by that mode of communication. The second you're addressing a collective male audience, which you're acknowledging has economic interests that have a systematic origin to them and not an origin that has to do with them, grinding harder. A lot of women feel very, very, and a lot of men too, feel very, very threatened by this mode of the conversation. And so again and again, we just have to kind of like push it down and sublimate it and pretend like we're having a conversation that doesn't exist. Pretend like, you're talking to the worst fail son or incel imaginable, and then continue in this way for the performative benefit of, I'm sorry to say this, like wives that feel like if a collective political male interest enters the discourse in a way where the leader has an obligation to address it, this is fundamentally threatening to their well-being. Um, I guess maybe, but all that says to me is that these types of people can't be in the same discourse space as people who are trying to address this problem or trying to come up with solutions to it. That's the only conclusion that I can really draw at this time. And I'm bringing up sort of a bunch of blind spots for Joel Berry and for a bunch of Christian leaders and a variety of other centrists, and of course everyone having to do basically all of the boomer centrists, either on the moderate left or the mainstream left or the mainstream right, like my parents. I don't feel like I'm in discourse. I feel like I'm kind of babysitting people's psychological hangups. Um, so, and like, why is that my job? Like, is my job to be here and continuously repost the same 4 or 5 things back to these people, and then they tap out and they go away, and then they don't have an answer for it, and then like a week later the chatbot resets and they'll come back with the exact same arguments again, and we'll do this again. And Neil Shenvi and Joel Berry don't have any answers to the contentions I bring to them about how you can evaluate concepts like excellence and patriotism in a country that's no longer Christian, and specifically when they're being advanced by explicitly and obviously non-Christian leaders. There's no answer for this. There's never an answer for this problem whatsoever. Um, it is something that they have this perspective, and um, it's not really a perspective, is it? They have this perspective, and it really is more like a hang up. I always say this, that there comes a point in the conversation where it really does feel like you're just kind of babysitting people's autism, and it's not really the job of discourse to come into a room with two people that have like psychological hangups, and what they want to do, and what people oftentimes, when they have some kind of psychological hang up, what they want to have like the same conversation over and over again. that because it feels cathartic, it feels good. So I'm like a classic example of this, and I'm sure people have examples of this in their own family. So this is true on both sides of my family, but you always have like the relative that's not doing very well. And so, like, everyone's favorite topic when that relative is obviously not there is like, how do we fix this person's problems? And this person's problems are like they're unfixable. They're essentially psychological problems having to do with decisions they're making in their real life. But the conversation kind of goes in like this circular pattern. Well, this person did this. Oh no, not again. And then you talk about how, oh man, they're really, really on this downward trajectory and it's so bad. And like, there's a lot of sharing of emotions and everyone's kind of commiserating about, this person's either their bad behavior or their self-sabotaging behavior. And like everyone's kind of like on the same page, but you realize really quickly, the conversation's not here to generate solutions for this person. Like you're not actually seriously entertaining an intervention, which is what would be necessary. Or you're not seriously talking about how you can modify your habits to be there for them, or how you can encourage them to change their environment. You're just talking about their problems so that you can talk about their problems, because talking about someone else's problems feels cathartic. It feels like you're doing something, and it also kind of, let's be honest here, it makes you feel kind of smugly superior because those problems, if you had them, you'd instantly solve them. And like no one's bringing arguments, no one's debating or comparing plans. We're just wringing our hands over this, and that's the same thing is true for. I'm sure this is what's happening with these boomer cons and the perennial issue of Zoomers not being able to come into themselves either economically or in the dating market. Like they like having these conversations where they dish on people for not being not achieving what they did, and how they need to pull themselves up and man up, not because like they're pioneering a new program to get men to do this, or not because they want men to organize, or not because they want to address the problems in society, but because doing so just kind of creates this like very, very comfortable cycle of discourse again and again. Like this is the conversation, and the conversation feels good while we have it. The conversation feels good when we have it, and then we have the conversation, and then like, well, let's have the same conversation tomorrow. And then like it feels good while we have it. And like this is the pattern. It's sort of the same thing with Rod Dreher clutching his pearls over the latest outrage. I mean, sure, like if you're Sargon and it's 2015, I mean the outrage is meaningful because well, it's meaningful in hindsight because the outrage is shaking you out of a certain complacency with the progressive liberal order, which eventually evolves into ideological change. Uh, this sort of like cathartic hand wringing complaint about young men continuously, it's only designed to feel good in the moment so that you can have the same like men do better talk the next day. And I'm not convinced that. And this, I guess, is sort of the ultimate death of discourse for myself in the boomerang. I'm done with this. I mean, I guess I will do more talks with these local distance types and these Joel Berry types if I'm absolutely forced to. But I mean, I don't feel like talking to them on Twitter again. I don't even know what to say anymore. I mean, I'm not even convinced that this is a journey that they're on. I was very convinced, and I would feel vindicated in my feeling that the liberalists and the anti-SJW, anti-wokey crowd from 2015 and 2016 were on a journey. I don't think that Joel Berry is on a journey in which he will discover the problems implicit in the modern world. I think that Joel Berry is complaining about problems like my grandmother used to complain about problems. Like they're complaining about problems to have something to talk about. They're complaining about problems because it's cathartic. They're complaining about problems because they're too autistic and they're in kind of an autistic mode and they don't want to actually pop out and ask the larger question. It's just not my job to babysit these kind of these kind of dispositions anymore. I'm done with like the boomer chatbot reset after a while. It's not like I'm not saying anything or I'm not doing anything in my present. I'm writing a ton on my blog. I'm about to publish the second part of this enormous thing on literary criticism. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I am kind of lamenting the fact that dialectic does drive thinking, and if you don't have anyone to argue against or to test your ideas out on, it's hard to write about things in the abstract. Like I've written, oh God, it must be like 20,000 words on books right now. And I've got like 7,000 ready to go tomorrow or the next day, or maybe if I get delayed over the weekend or something like that. I guess tomorrow's Ash Wednesday, so I wouldn't have time to work on it then. But at some time in the near future, I'll get the next installment out. Um, and I have book reviews that are coming down the pipe. I have poetry that I want to start writing. I've got bigger projects, but I don't know what, again, in case, unless something radically changes, I do not know what thought looks like in this era of like total zero discourse. I know what, on X, and I know I'm taking a break from X or Zitter or Twitter over Lent, so I'm going to be off of it for 40 days until Easter. But the thing is that I know the only thing that's going to go on in X meaningfully is probably this boomer discourse. I imagine that's the only kind of interesting exchange that's going to happen until something radically changes with how discourse goes. Uh, I don't exactly know what that's going to be, and it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, what's coming up on our own docket right now is we have, again, like I have all of the sort of more cultural projects that I'm working on for myself. We have the Old Glory Conference coming up in May. The Natalism Conference from my friend Kevin Dolan, who I had on the channel just the other day, is coming up in, good Lord, that's coming up in late March, I believe. I'm not going to be in attendance, but it's an interesting thing. I guess it is sort of like they're debugging a problem, which is the problem of crashing birth rates. And I mean, those are all very, very interesting things. But the missing piece is how political structures are going to exist in a space that is radically different from how it existed before 2024. And I was listening to a podcast by Catherine D, or Default Friend, and I mean she's getting, I mean, she's very much on the opposite end of some of these questions that I am, in the sense that I think she is a person who's skeptical of progressivism. She's a person who's aware of these problems in modernity. She talks a lot about that all the time. And she certainly reads our stuff and watches our stuff periodically. And I get the sense that I get the sense from a lot of these people that they're looking for something new to come around. I still feel that I say I know what I know. I don't know what the new dynamic is going to be that reintroduces discourse to the modern world, but I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like libertarianism, right? It also does not look like Richard Hanania's rebranding of libertarianism. This was a thing in 2024 that I'm just totally uninterested in this. I know that people like I think Catherine D and the people in her circle, they look at Hanani and go like, this is a new thing. This is so exciting. This is, well, we used to be progressives and then we went to the right, and now the logical thing is to be post-right. But Hanania is just the old libertarianism that everyone knows is defunct, repackaged and rebranded with the word elite written across the top of it. Richard Hanania does not have a coherent ideology. He doesn't have a coherent worldview. He has a brand, and the brand relies on the perception of him being elite, or the perception that these ideas are embraced by elites. But Richard Hanania, his ideas are designed to be popular to a funding class, to a class that gives him money. They're not designed to be compelling when used as an argument. They're certainly not designed to be coherent. And to the extent that they have any compelling or coherent nature to them, they're just a repackaging of the same mistakes that we saw and mostly rejected in libertarianism. There's no here, and like so, I'm really confident when I look at people like Richard Hanani, or another one was like deep left analysis, trying to do like the exact same thing as Richard Hanani was trying to do for the right, but for the left. Uh, these are just non-starters, and like there's a few telltale signs of when I know someone is not serious. When I know someone's not serious about ideas, the second I get the sense that they're trying to like troll people. Like they're trying to explicitly, like there's a performative aspect of their ideas. And I'm not gonna, well, I mean I could talk about a few people who do this, but they slink out sort of egregious proposals that are provocative and that would ordinarily be satirical, but are presented as serious so that they can kind of game the algorithm and get a lot of shares back and forth. Whenever I see that, I kind of like take a big step back and go like, okay, this is obviously a dead end. The other thing that I look for is, are these people trying to join the winning side? Instant backing away from that. I've no desire to to join uh, a thinker that's trying to join the winning side, or alternatively the elite side. We did this with Thomas Friedman. I remember from Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman's a good example of a thinker that was very self-consciously trying to join the winning side in the early 2000s. He was like, okay, what do elite important people believe? I'll believe that and I'll sell that back to them. And like he had this book called The World is Flat, which is essentially, here are all the problems with globalization, but don't you know it's actually great. And and that was his brand, and it got him into the New York Times, and it kept him as a New York Times columnist for nigh on, was it 3 decades now? I It's been a while since he's been there, and he hasn't had an idea since that. And the problem here is that, with these like, oh, I'm going to join the winning side. Okay, great. Like that is a way to get yourself listened to. That's a way to get funding for yourself. That is a way to present yourself. And women really like that mode too. They really like thinkers that portray themselves as if they're like, now we're elite. Like we are elite human capital. There are some people who, I mean, I don't need to name names here, but there are plenty of elite human capital people. There are plenty of these post-right people who are very obviously not elite in any way, shape, or form. These people have deep psychological problems. They have deep issues with drugs. And while they say that like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm like, I'm on the cutting edge of Silicon Valley, they have no connection to this stuff. They saw a certain way that Silicon Valley was going and they hopped on the bandwagon. And now all here we are calling them elite, or whatever adjective they decided to compliment themselves with currently. This is not something that it's not interesting from a discourse point of view. And it also indicates like a fundamental misunderstanding, because women go for professions of how elite you are by believing X, Y, or Z. But I feel like all men should know this, and I mean, you should really internalize this if you're a man. I don't know if it's I mean, I'm being a misogynist. I'm not so sure how possible it is to internalize this as a woman. Uh, Ideas cannot be elite. People are elite. And elite people will gravitate to certain ideas largely because they don't care about what other people think, and largely because they're able to get out ahead of certain trends. There is always that dimension to the elite ideas of a certain period. But ideas can't be elite for the simple fact that if an elite holds ideas for too long, then everyone who's not elite, who's specifically also who think in a more lunar or feminine mode will adopt those ideas. And then when everyone joins that ideology, it will no longer be elite. We did this with progressivism in the last 10 years. We sped ran that throughout the Obama administration. When Obama got elected, the kind of ideas that you'd see in Berkeley and Stanford, they were everywhere in elite colleges. And then in 4 years, every single 90 IQ person, who wanted to seem like they were on the right side of history, adopted a more radical version of the Barack Obama ideas on intersectionality. And then we had, 10 years of that being an idiotic idea that was transparently stupid. Uh, that's what happens to everything. There are elite believers in Christianity. Then the country becomes Christian. Then Christianity becomes no longer an elite idea. If you chase elite status, then you're going to be you're going to be uh, I don't know. You're basically turning yourself into a slave of the discourse rather than the master of the discourse. And I guess that's what people are asking for. They're saying, I don't want to think for myself. So just tell me who the good people are, and I will spend my time boosting those good elite ideas. I'm not. That's not interesting to me, and it shouldn't be interested into anybody who's actually wants to push the platform forward. And I guess there's sort of a masculine equivalent to this, which is like the Vosh and Hassan Piker and Destiny crowd. I mean, I guess I hope this is self-destructing. I mean, people always been talking about how Destiny and Vosh and Hassan are on their last legs. This is over for them, and it never is. They always come back because on the internet, no one ever is really gone altogether. But I'll tell you this. I don't particularly want Destiny's audience. I know Destiny's audience is large, but the fact that you're part of Vosh or Destiny's audience after everything that we've seen, uh, it indicates to me that you need, and I know I'm being incredibly condescending saying this, but if you're a part of Vosh's audience or Destiny's audience at this stage, like there needs to be sort of a remedial level of moral value and of how proper thought should be approached online, and how not to get sort of sucked into a media clout hole, the way that all of Hassan and Vosh's and Destiny's audience is. I mean, there are people you could they're following Destiny for dating advice. I mean, for dating advice, for advice on women. This is I always get hung up on this with Destiny, but it's so ridiculous. I can't possibly believe this. But you'll see all of these Destiny GG people on his stream like, oh my god, he's got it all figured out. Uh, the idea of the ideas exist so that you make good decisions. Destiny's ideas about relationships have essentially, I mean, his life is not destroyed because he is a famous streamer who can turn on his webcam and make thousands and thousands of dollars in one sitting. So his life is not destroyed. But if what happened to Destiny happened to anyone else who was not independently wealthy, their life would be in the shitter in no short order. And it's obvious to see this. And all the while, everyone warned him that if he did this, there would be these consequences. And what happened? Well, you can't prove to me that these consequences will happen because you don't have like 14 peer-reviewed studies that show that that having an open relationship with your wife is going to end poorly. Do you really have 14 peer-reviewed studies? If not, BTFO, Destiny wins again. Now, and then of course, what does Destiny do? He gets into an open relationship and BTFOs himself through reality. Congratulations. I'm not interested in ideas that are elite. I'm not interested in ideas because they're perceived as having won a debate in some kind of IABS forum. I'm interested in ideas that have a generative quality to them. And and Hanania is very much trying to do the whole Vosh mode for an elite audience. It's all smoke and mirrors, and all of the people kind of going in this direction are doing the same thing. So it feels at this point like we're just kind of waiting on the outside of this process. Like the boomers are going back to the boomer cope, and we're sitting on the outside just kind of waiting for something to change, I guess. I hate to say this, but the piece on the board, obviously I'm going to talk a little bit about how we could do things potentially that could, for organizing, for moving things in a better direction in our own communities. I mentioned the conferences that we're running, and there's lots of interesting projects that are going on in the sphere of arts and letters in this community. There's all sorts of opportunities along those dimensions. But really, the big mystery box right now is what are the thoughtful members of the left wing going to do? Uh, and I don't see anything like that going on. I think it might be a little bit early. It might be something that has to kind of emerge gradually. Um, Ultimately, the point of this whole thing is to dissolve the left right distinction. This is something that's been a long time coming, and it's not going to dissolve because, like, in the centrist side, like each side has some equal points. That's not how these dialectics dissolve. There are just some, mostly right wing points. There are just so many ideas on the right wing that just have to become like natural default ideas. This is what you need to get in the door to have a productive conversation. I'm not getting into a debate about whether humanity should continue itself. I'm not getting into a debate about antinatalism. Like, this is not going to happen. I have no interest in doing that. This is not a conversation that could ever be interesting to me. And to the extent that you're trying to instigate a debate about whether humanity itself is good, like, the debate's just over. So, like, being pro-natalism just has to be like a default view of everybody who's in the debate, period. A masculine perspective on ownership over the collective. I also don't want to hear that because you're such a victim, or because people are mean to you online, that, like, now society needs to go down in flames, and we're welcoming the apocalypse through our own laziness. I don't want to hear how you're happy to let a whole generation of young men uh, essentially break themselves through some fault of their own, but also because society isn't teaching them to be better. And your justification for this is, I'm a better man than you are. That, like, this kind of effeminate, like, I am going to be on the right side of history where all my civilization slides into the dustbin. I am not interested in having that conversation. And I understand that I'm courting misogyny here, a lot of women really, really, really like to be in the perspective of, uh, I am a victim, and men need to do better while society burns. Listen, if you're in a political conversation, you're not in a debate about how the other people need to do better. You're in a debate about how we can be better. Like, the people in this conversation are trying to develop the better ideas to make things better. The people doing better are not some group that's not in this conversation. The people that are doing better are the people in this room. And what we're doing better about are the ideas that we're talking about. No men need to do better. No Zoomers need to do better. I even a little bit, even like, and hey, I'll do this again too. Like, even boomers, I don't care if it's boomers' fault. I really don't. Like, they look, people don't remember that it was a different world in the 80s and 90s. It was a different world in the 70s. They didn't think that these apparatuses that are currently crumbling were as vulnerable as we now know they are. And so, talking about how, like, the boomers need to do better, that's also, like, I'm not interested in this conversation. And so, I'm not interested in debating whether the family is good or not. Maybe a little bit. I'm interested if the nuclear family is detrimental to the continued survival of the human race, or to our appreciation of God, then I'll entertain polygamy. Like if a Muslim comes in and says, we need to go to harems so that the human race doesn't die and so we can be loyal to God's commandments, that's an entertainment argument I'll entertain. I'm not entertaining the argument that the family is bad because it makes like it violates some individual right to consent that the child has, or because you could optimize the dopamine hits by opening up the marriage, like the destiny argument. Like I'm not interested in having this conversation because the conversation undermines a presupposed moral argument that would otherwise make the entire conversation ridiculous otherwise. I'm not interested in having a conversation about the definitions of various collective identities that are necessarily statistical with people who have no desire to actually, eh, you know, enforce those statistical boundaries. Like, I'm not going to have a conversation about what is an American with someone who's not an American. I'm not having a conversation about what a European or a German is with people who want to undermine that concept. And my largest one, the one that pisses me off the most, I'm not having a conversation about what counts as the proper practice of Christianity. If I know for a fact that you're invested in undermining the idea of Christianity, I mean, do I need to explain to you why this is the case? Do I have to explain to you in order to get a ticket into the actual conversation, into the actual post left, into the actual post right, into the synthesis that will happen from the dissolution of a lot of these fake boundaries? You need to demonstrate that there's a certain level of actual good faith that's going on. And it's not good faith. I mean, it's literally not good faith to try to play definition games from a view from nowhere, trying to deconstruct, and anybody can deconstruct anything. And everyone who's ever deconstructed a concept knows this. We all know this implicitly. You can deconstruct anything. And if you allow outsiders who have no investment in a given thing to deconstruct it, like, you will, congratulations. The moral basis for having any productive conversation has been completely undermined. Okay, great. So now, once we get past this whole, common core morality in whatever basic form it exists, a common decision to take responsibility over politics, e.g., we are talking about the ideas that do better, not how some party outside of us needs to do better. For us, the sacred victims, we're talking about people who are invested in a collective. Then we can have a conversation about what needs to happen. What needs to happen for there to be a continued human thriving. And I think, and I had Kevin Dolan on, and I consider him a good friend. I really like him, but I kind of jokingly ambushed him with a bunch of questions about the natal conference. And the thing about the natal conference is like what the Red Scare girls said, right? It's an example of conservatives having like debates over, in some sense, the most important topics, but also the ones that are kind of the most useless to talk about. Like, who was talked into having more children by a speech given at the natal conference? Right? Like, it's kind of implicitly an idiotic idea, and it's like what Spengler said. And there's no dialectic with antinatalism. Like, there can't be. This is the one conversation Spengler said you could never have, which is the conversation on whether to continue the human race or not. This life does not need a reason to exist. It either exists or it doesn't, and all life wants to perpetuate itself. So having a conversation with antinatalists is itself anti-life. But on the other hand, Kevin Dolan has the exact right idea, and the exact right idea is, let's get everybody who's kind of sane into the room together. And the reason why I know that you're not insane is that, you've answered at least two of those three questions correctly in order to be interested in this thing called the natal conference. I mean, I'd actually be more interested in like the non-natalist ideas that come out of the natal conference, because, I think in some ways, like, pronatalism is an unsolvable problem because, like Kevin Dolan said on my podcast, it is essentially everything that is causing this in the modern world. And you can say, like, I think that becoming noble, Johann Kurtz. He's like, "Oh, I solved it. It's status," and he is right. It's status, but no one knows how to manipulate. There's no like status knob that we can turn in society. So saying it's status is equivalent to saying that it's everything. And natalism is not solvable, but the fact that people are meeting in a place and they're having conversations about the future of our species is encouraging, because this creates the avenue for dissolving these meaningless distinctions. Like a good example of a meaningless left-right decision. It's like, how do we appropriate budget, or how do we control taxes? Um, these are meaningless questions because the first order questions that surround them haven't been answered yet. Once we establish that the tax rate is designed to essentially foster a new human generation, then we can talk about whether we want tariffs or whether we want an income tax, or whether we want to print a lot of money or not, or whether we want to try to anchor our currency to something that's hard, so that we do not have these kind of debt bombs periodically emerge on the horizon, which is a curse of modernity. These are all things that we can that are in some sense necessary to discuss, but only can be discussed if we understand what our end state is. The end state cannot be GDP goes up. That's the assumption of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum does not care about the species. They care that this line called GDP goes up for their lifetimes, and they're willing to sacrifice any number of human metrics of health in order to essentially create this kind of machine that keeps on operating. Uh, these cannot be active disagreements inside a collective on this matter. And so, I mean, I guess there's certain productivity in just having having people come together and talk about this. And this is the thing I think people should think about. I'm like, what are the new horizons? Like, what are the new things that have opened up for us in the Trump administration? At some point, discourse with the left is going to reopen for us. It might be a year or two. I believe that door is going to reopen. Just as the discourse with the boomers is starting to shut. Like, there's literally nothing that I can say to these people anymore that I haven't said a million times. I can walk them through their contradictions. I can walk them through their double standards over the use of racism, or their double standards when it comes to appreciating collectives, either biblically or for non-white peoples that suddenly become scary when it applies to people of European heritage. I can go over all these things a million times and it will never change. But what are the new horizons that are opening up? This is an interesting question. I mean, right now, and we're heading into spring right now. Like, winter is always a difficult time for organization. Spring tends to be a lot easier. This is the time when people really should be walking into the opportunities available for themselves to kind of expand their community a little bit. I don't know how to have this conversation, but if you can, if there's somebody who's like a boomer in your life who's at all politically active, see if you cannot set up a group of people in your community that are talking about these things, like we have in our conferences. And this is the idea of basket weaving always was, we would develop these conferences, then we would develop mini events. And the mini events would be ways to get sympathetic but people of a boomer persuasion into the same room and expose them to these ideas in a way that seemed like not internet based, in a way that seemed that it was happening, that it was real, that these ideas were believed by respectable people, and the walls of discourse into this whole area of ideas was open once more. Um, that's the goal. Uh, how could you achieve it is a different question. Are there leftists that are able to kind of are they reaching out now? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the problem with leftists right now is that now they're going to spend the next 4 years breaking their brains over Trump, and trying to revivify the resistance That's what the New York Times constantly spent, like half of their podcasts are about like, where's the resistance? Where is the resistance? Where is the resistance? Well, the resistance is nowhere. I mean, Trump got elected. You've got no narrative about why he's illegitimate, and he's moving too fast for you to focus on any one given grievance. There is no resistance because people are overwhelmed. And another thing is everyone's burnt out on discourse at this stage. And does that mean that some progressives are going to come around and talk about ideas? I mean, what do I want to talk about? Like, if I were having a progressive in my room, in this room right now, like, what would I approach them with? I mean, if I would approach them with, I guess, kind of I would kind of float natalism first, right? Because if they don't agree that the total decline of the human race and its biodiversity is a problem, I literally don't know where to begin. Then I'd hit them with the decline of family. And if I could get them with those two things, if they're on board with trying to improve families and improve family formation, and we can start talking about how to facilitate that, which, I guess that immediately goes to sort of their sacred cows. But I mean, how sacred of a cow? I've always wondered this. Like, I feel like a lot of progressives they're kind of flirting with the possibility of being anti-pornography. If you could just crack that door open, all of their socially liberal policies might kind of start unraveling one after the other. Like, first there's pornography. Maybe that's bad. Okay, well then is surrogacy bad? Is promiscuous sex bad? Is sex work bad? All of these things, or is drug use bad? And then, since we're controlling people's behaviors, what can we do to get people thinking in directions of productivity, of actually encouraging good behavior? And then that opens up a whole avenue, because now the conversation is reframed. The focus is in the right direction. And you've broken down their walls, because in that process you've got them to kind of dismantle some of their problems. I'm also looking forward to the OGC, and I know I constantly do my stream at the same time that they do their stream. So, it seems like I've got a pretty good turnout. I know I'm competing with Twitter as well. So there's that. I think most people are actually listening on Twitter or X right now. So that's really interesting. That's kind of crazy to think that I effectively doubled my viewership by opening up a portal onto X. I guess no one watches on YouTube anymore. But the OGC is interesting. I mean, they're doing great work from what I've seen. I am sort of an emeritus member, as I was kind of a founder, but also I'm not part of the leadership in any way, shape, or form, because I just don't have the bandwidth or time to deal with that. And of course, I attend their conference every year, which is a great little trip. And this might be the last year where it's public, because we opened the tickets up for this convention and it sold out in 12 hours. That's the level of hunger for fraternal societies right now, is that we can open up a conference and have it sell out in 12 hours. We could essentially double the size of this conference and still have it be be functional. This is a huge step forward. Now, I guess part of this, I'm always an eternal pessimist, is that this is going to require, like, what the OGC has kind of bitten off for this next year, essentially becoming a fraternal organization in an enormous number of places, and actually having things that it does in every one of those places that are meaningful, political, and they're focused on mutual aid. This role will require an enormous amount of organization and formalization and preparation. And this is a challenge going forward, but this is something that's this is a key deliverable. This is a key deliverable, because if this dimension of the problem is solved, if we have an avenue where young men are meeting, then all of a sudden we have forums that we can control. And we already have forums, so we can control inside like the events that we put on semi periodically, and that's all well good. It's all well and good. But I'm talking about a known quantity of young political actors that are all moving in the same direction. And there's sort of this sort of commensurate idea, and this is, I don't know if I even have them. You know, another thing is while the OGC is sort of taking on the task of the fraternal mutual aid societies, the bigger problem for me is just developing the scenes of arts and letters. This is necessarily going to have to be, I think, more the afternoon perspective taken by the West Coast dissidents. But this is something that we have to move into. The era of internet trolling, I mean, again, like I was never really into the whole trolling thing. I understand why people did it. It kind of expanded the Overton window. It was like this avenue. You're trying to express ideas that couldn't be expressed anywhere else. 2025, this is the point where people have to stand up and show people the quality. They have to show people the vision. They have to show people that there are things that can be salvaged. You know, I've kind of been very negative on nostalgia, and I there's lots of ways in which this has, I think, really held the right wing back, and romanticism also. There's this quality of romanticism and nostalgia that really hits you when you're in your 20s. This feeling that you're remembering, uh, having a connection with a time that was better and that no longer exists, and that had some sort of very profound spiritual quality to it that can no longer be found in your ordinary humdrum life right now. And it's crippling. And I always want to push back on it, and especially when it comes to like the anime waifu question. I could go on about anime waifus. It's like the worst thing. If you're a young guy, just don't do it. Never ever simp and posting images of women and making them the representation of your aspirations is a form of simping. It disempowers you because you're starting to orbit around the female. The female is supposed to orbit around the male. That's what women want to do. But in all of this romanticism and nostalgia, I mean, you are having a genuine experience. Like you're seeing things from the old world that were good, and that were beautiful, and like your soul is crying out, trying to grab onto that. But the problem is it has to be divorced from the LARP. Like the falseness has to be cut away from it. So if you're going through and you're looking at an antique, there's two people who buy antiques. So, the first person, you walk into an antique store, you see an antique chair. Now, the antique chair is doing absolutely nothing. It's from a previous time. It inspires emotions in you, like it inspired emotions from the previous owner of that antique chair, which is probably why they kept it from when it was built in the 40s or 50s, or maybe even the 20s or 30s. And now it's sitting in this store ready for you to purchase it for some incredibly low amount of money. Um, there's two people who buy antique chairs. The first types of people are the people that want to have the antique chair because of the emotions that elicits in them. And so they buy the antique chair, and then they essentially put the antique chair in their closet or their attic. And now they have just, all they've done is they've taken this thing that gave them momentary pleasure, and they've turned it into essentially junk that lives in their attic and gives them momentary stress. The other people who buy these things, they restore them. They have a plan of how to use it, and they have a plan of how to kind of like take this older thing and reimagine it in the modern context. What would it take to get your friends to actually use an antique piece of furniture? How would it have to be restored? How could you create a living room that exhibits a certain kind of motif? Maybe that's useful. Maybe that's something that could give people pleasure, give people, an avenue or ability to experience something that's greater than themselves. There is this discourse that appeared on Twitter, and I was told I should talk about this for a while. And it's very much in my wheelhouse, absolutely. And this was the hipster discourse from Indian Bronson. And Indian Bronson was said something like, "Well, this is hipsterdom is like the last gasp of implicit whiteness, and this is sort of a natural thing, and it was killed by the Great Awakening because it was too white." And that was certainly the case. And then people fire back and they say, well, hipsterdom was actually killed because people were pretentious and fake. And no one wanted to be around a bunch of fake people that were constantly expecting you to pat them on the back for having the right tastes in music, for having the right tastes in furniture, for having the best dinner parties with the most Michael Pollan-esque meals, all locally sourced and delicious. Yeah, I mean, but both are kind of true, right? It was both pretentious and irritating, but also like this incredible missed opportunity. The incredible missed opportunity was that the hipster phenomenon, as it existed from the late '90s to 2013, when the Great Awakening killed it, this actually did generate like an enormous number of really interesting artifacts and moments, and if only it had taken the next step, right? If only people had said, like, I am fascinated by this, this dinner party. Like, let's make this a sacred element of our lives going forward. Let's institutionalize it. Let's make it something that we're committed to. Let's sort of invest a portion of our egos into it, so this becomes an organic living thing in its own right. It could have gotten so far. It could have actually been the thing that it was pretending to be. Fake it until you make it is the thing that both inspired and killed the millennial generation. But it's only because they didn't make it. It's only because they didn't actually make the sacrifices and invest the sacred essence that was needed for the sacred form to be realized in their own lives. I guess this is where we finish kind of fittingly on Shrove Tuesday, or Mardi Gras, as it's known colloquially. Uh, all of us Catholics will be doing the Ash Wednesday routine tomorrow. Probably JD Vance as well. Um, Look, guys, when we're building, when in discourse, what makes discourse non-cathartic is that you're putting your ego on the line and sacrificing it for the truth and sacrificing it for the greater good. What makes what makes art and the good things that you see in the past, the things that the hipsters gravitated to, at least in form, what makes them feel good and that feeling of nostalgia that you're reacting to, it's because of the sacrifice people put into them in their love and in their souls and in the investment and the order that was there. What made fraternal organizations, what made the OGC work this time, and God willing, it will continue to work. It works because there's a core group of men that are loyal to each other, and that are loyal to a certain set of practices that they want to continue going on and going forward into the future. Organizations and art and politics and discourse only exist to the extent that we can kind of die to them in our egos. And that, I think, is what the whole season that we're about to enter into in terms of Lent kind of calls us towards. Can you, I think, that, people do this cycle in Lent where they do something that's really like extreme, and then they either do it for the 40 days and then it's like really draining and they never do it again. Or it comes off, more often than not, it comes off as pretentious. It comes off as pretentious. Um, I don't know. In my mind, I'm going to try to do this. Obviously, I'm going to get off of X, and this is nothing new. I get off of X like every other Lent. Essentially, I've gotten off of X for 40 days. But I want, if you're looking for a good fast, in addition to the typical ones having to do with meat and sweets and desserts, however you regulate that, either in the pre or post Vatican II sense, I think you should try to develop a spiritual habit in yourself that requires some mode of sacrifice, but that is entirely private to yourself, but that is still is sort of a beautiful sacrifice, like a moment of prayer or a pattern of Bible study. And when you're doing this, use for yourself. Don't show this to other people. Don't be the hipster, but try to use the most beautiful tools and invest in it. Like if you're doing prayer, like make a diary out of it, right? So that after you're done with the Lenten prayers, you've got like this little book, and the book will have like the reflections upon saying a decade of the Rosary, or even just like the check marks that you see on the calendar, and like so you have like a physical thing that shows that you did it. So like you can reinforce it in yourself that you're doing this, and like keep it to yourself. Just feel out what it would take to build an institution just for yourself in the smallest quantity. And then maybe use that discipline to expand, to kind of what would it take to get this discipline to be something that multiple people shared together? What would it take to get these kind of practices to something that we are experiencing as a community among friends who I know are thinking about the problems of the world in the same way? Basket weaving is a general meetup group, but as many people have pointed out, you need deeper commitments. It was always going to have to turn into something more like the OGC. And while the OGC is not basket weaving is much more general. It serves a variety of different organizations. It's just a meetup group. You want to meet up. You want to develop friendships with people who share your values, that share your sacramental practices. And I think that you learn how to create these sacramental practices through the discipline that's imposed on you, that you impose upon yourself, in moments where it's you're called to do it, and you're called to do it for 40 days now. Try enforcing an institution upon yourself, because all institutions are sacrifice, and all sacrifice is essentially an institution. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to end the lecture portion and move on to the super chats. So I don't know. I know that I'm on. So those of you who are listening to me on the space, I wonder if I can do this. Can I pull this up here and reply to it? I guess I can. Okay, so I do have a chat. So there is a service called Entropy. If you want me to answer one of your questions, you can indeed use the Entropy chat. I don't know. I have no idea how X works. I know I'm broadcasting there, and it looks like a lot of people are watching. If you scroll down on my timeline, you'll see it there. But if you're wondering, like, where are all of these messages coming from? They are coming from Entropy. Okay, great. So that being said, let us get started and go through the super chats or the Entropy chats. Okay. Fritzen, that's not good. Okay, there we go. All right, perfect. So those of you who are watching on YouTube, which I guess is a minority, I guess most people are listening to this on X. That's not surprising. Most people would rather listen than they would, watch something on YouTube. I guess I should have done this a long time ago. But if you're watching, you can read along here. Fritz Imperial says for $5. Hey Dave, hope you had a blessed Lent. Hope you have a blessed Lent. Cyberpunk is a good genre at showcasing acute issues with modernity, especially regarding technology. What other themes do you think the genre or others like it could explore? God bless. Cyberpunk. Now there's an interesting genre. Well, I don't know, Fritz. I mean, Cyberpunk is interesting, but sort of for not the reasons people think it is. So, there are a variety of genres that showcase like how technology goes bad. And that was actually the most popular genre of science fiction in the 20th century. If you watch any episode of The Twilight Zone, like how this technology goes bad is like, every third episode is essentially like that. When we look at something like Neuromancer or um, oh, I guess Neuroman. I was going to say Count Zero or Mona Lisa Odra, like basically the sequels to Neuromancer, or any of like what was the other one? Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, or there are a few other cyberpunk authors from the '90s that I'm blanking on. I used to be a huge fan of the genre. What's unique about cyberpunk is that, and this is absolutely not the point of Gibson's original novel, was supposed to be, here's an adventure story in postmodernity, in hard postmodernity. Modernity has happened. There are no moral systems. This is just survival of the fittest in a post-technological environment, blah, 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 blah. That is what Neuromancer is. But what eventually emerged out of cyberpunk, and what I think Gibson accidentally revealed, was how can I be a hero even in a situation when society acknowledges no greater value? Because one of the things about Neuromancer is that while Case is absolutely the most anti-hero person of all times, he does, despite his own complete nihilism, exhibit moments of heroism despite himself. And regardless of whether we're just acknowledging the sprawl or the world of the sprawl as being this just absolute hellhole, the 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 audience is only interested in it because there's this adventure story involved. And I guess this is not to kind of like toot my own nerd horn here, but this is always what I loved about the board game slash card game Netrunner, because Netrunner was about how you're fighting somebody and the person you're fighting is way more powerful than you are. And how can you be clever? How can you think in different ways to get around the fact that you're essentially an ant? And this thing can just crush you if it really, really, really focuses its efforts on doing so. And I think that's the reason why that's the theme that people really pick up, even though it is very explicitly not the point that the author originally intended. This is sort of a death of the author reading of something like Neuromancer. Um, Ben White for $3 says, "Hi Dave, what are some suggestions for having a holy Lent? I struggle with overeating and usually abstain from meat, but I end up failing halfway through Lent. What would you do?" I would focus on the carbs, not the meat. So you're definitely obliged to have meatless Fridays. I don't think you're obliged to have meatless other day. I think, I don't know. It depends on how you interpret Vatican II. But I would definitely focus before you can give up meat altogether. That's probably what you should do. But if you're worried about overeating, overeating is driven by sugar, by carbs, by sugar, by snacking. So if you can only eat the standard 3 meals a day and then cut the carbs out of all but one of them, or maybe all of them if you're really hardcore, if you can do that, that would be an enormous like dietary thing. You will absolutely lose weight after 40 days if you keep. Now you'll probably gain it back when when you reintroduce sugar into your diet, unfortunately, because that's how human metabolisms work. But that definitely is something I'd recommend. Asteroidal Assassin for $5. In 2022, I had no idea what Ash Wednesday was at my job when I saw people with black marks on their forehead. I thought I was going crazy. You would not believe how relieved I was to find out that it was a normal occurrence. Yeah, I guess so. I'm a remote worker, so I don't have to worry about that. Ben White again says, also, I was at a young adults church group and I was talking to a young woman. She was friendly and had a nice German accent. Turns out she's going through a divorce and has a son. Can we get F's in the chat? Oh, good Lord, for the marriage? That's terrible. Divorce, well, I mean, technically, Catholic divorce shouldn't happen. But separations of Catholic families are just absolutely the worst thing and make me depressed just thinking about it. Um, yeah, but yeah, absolutely, that's a tragedy. People were talking about Catholic youth groups and the problem that the women in Catholic youth groups don't want to date the men in Catholic youth groups because there's all of these autists there, and ideally, men and women at these things should be mainly in sex segregated spaces, and the older guys should kind of do some mentoring for the younger guys. That would be a huge boon. I don't know what to say. Like this has to be part of it. I think COVID in particular just must have completely killed this scene. Astradal Assassin says Ramadan has been hard. No food, no water, or masturbation from sunup to sundown is brutal. I nominate you, yes, you, for Ramadan. I know you can handle it. Actually, one year I did do the no food from sunup to sundown for Lent, and obviously the no masturbation thing is something you should be doing all the time if you're a Christian. I don't know how Muslims feel about it, but yeah, I mean, the sun up to sundown thing, the problem is that when I did that for one Lent, I gained a lot of weight because as soon as the sun went down, I would just have like this huge meal and then go right to bed. And of course, that's a recipe for having like absolutely, no, like basically, destroying your metabolism because you're sluggish for the rest of the day. And then all during the night, you just put on all this fat. I respect Muslims for doing it, especially if Ramadan tracks into the summer. But I would try to, I mean, if you're trying to limit food, there's Christian ways to do this by limiting the quality of food and making the meals really small. And I'd look into those before I would do like the sun up to sundown with like a huge binge after sundown. Yeah, let's do that. Nerve AMV Maker for $5 USA. I just saw your review of Scott Pilgrim with Last Things. In it, you said that the comic and film were clearly imitations of FLCL. This begs an important question. What's your opinion of FLCL? It's in Japanese, it's pronounced Fooly Cooly, I believe. Good Lord. I saw that anime once in high school and I really didn't understand it at all. I didn't like the main character. I didn't like the punk rocker, heartthrob. I didn't like the kind of harem love triangle they were trying to do. I didn't like the surrealism. I really didn't vibe with Fooly Cooly, but some people loved it. Some people, and obviously the people who did Scott Pilgrim really loved it because it was obviously influenced that comic and subsequently that movie that destroyed a whole generation of women, apparently, according to the internet. I don't know. I mean, anime is so difficult. I don't know really what to make of it. I have a feeling that I mean, I showed some of it to my wife and she was, nah, it's okay. I showed her Vampire Hunter D, and that was a hit. And I still really like that one because I could feel like I can show Vampire Hunter D to anyone and they'll like it. It's just a good horror romance in either the 80s or the 2000s form. I think the 2000 one is a little more accessible, but it's just a good little adventure story. And it's very beautiful and nothing to be said about that. The problem is when you get to all these animes that try to have messages. Now, there's some that I like. Like I liked the director that did Serial Experiments Lane and Haibane Renmei and Nia Under Seven. Like I felt like there were some Christian themes there. I was an atheist when I liked those, but I saw like that was actually something that was going on there that was really interesting. But I'm always suspicious. Did I understand that? Is that like were people kind of waving their hands at that and not actually embracing the full extent of the implications of of the ideas they were grappling with? And I feel that way about most animes. The one that everyone's recommending, I see like Furion or whatever, about the elf that fights demons. Like I get people they like it because the demons are actually portrayed as demonic, and that's refreshing in an era of has been hotel where it's always like these are the good boy demons, these are the good boy demons, right? Like it's just absolutely like non-demonic demons defeats the whole point of demons. Like, did the demons have their own demons, since like they're just other types, they're essentially just like immortal types of humans, like they're fallen beings that are immortal and powerful. So I mean, like, I understand when people think that Furion is refreshing, but I don't know if I'm really expecting to see anything meaningful come out of it, right? And I was actually, another one I was reviewing is a video game, Final Fantasy Tactics, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. Also has a great anime plot based on the War of the Roses, and for my money, like a much more satisfying version of Game of Thrones. Like a much more satisfying version of Game of Thrones is in that video game if you have the patience to get through it. And I guess I still think it holds up a little bit. Like the soundtrack certainly holds up, and the story, like the tragic story, actually, like I still think about that. Does it have any deep meaning? Well, I mean, in Howard to have deep meaning, the director would actually have to grapple with its Christian themes, which I'm not confident have been done. And so, like all things modernity, it goes this far and then it stops when it stops being a consumer product. And because people don't want to take the necessary steps to sacrifice or commit to something for the ends of that, it stays an entertainment product. And, this is true with political discourse in the modern era. I mean, discourse has gone as far as it possibly can go while still being an entertainment product. And if this is only an entertainment product for you, I don't know if there's any future for you in politics. I mean, it's just going to be communities that hand wring. Oh, men, they're so terrible these days. Oh, women, they're so terrible these days. Oh, isn't modernity bad? Oh, isn't capitalism terrible? Isn't the cisnormal heteropatriarchy oppressive? Like, that's not real politics. And, because real politics is about what you can't leave behind, and it's about fighting for things that aren't entertainment products. Ben White for $5 USA says one of the things that are discussed on Academic Agents channel is whether Trump and Vance are truly our guys and will affect lasting change to the American system, or just refolding the system into a different but still pro-Israeli iteration. What do you think? I don't think that Trump and Vance are going to set up a new regime, but I think they're going to create enough contradictions in the current regime so that something much different and much more radical will become necessary in order to be stable. Because, they are doing damage to the cathedral, and the cathedral was already weak. Now, Academic Agent's really obsessed with this whole Israel thing. I do not think that this is like the linchpin of, like, I care that a new regime appears in the West. I do not care if there is like a country in the Middle East called Israel, or exactly how many Jews lived there. That is, I mean, I do hope that both Jews and Muslims find a way to live peacefully in that region. But as for like the composition or name of Palestine, is just not my concern. I do not see, unless you're some kind of millenarian, I do not see how this is the linchpin of all modern politics. I don't at all. And even if you feel that, like, statistically members of the ethnicity are bad actors in our own government, there needs to be an argument that comes afterwards. And look, guys, we are never going to know whether Trump and Vance are truly our guys or just flattering us until years after this administration is over. Historians will debate this topic. I mean, sure, entertain it as a proposition in the abstract, but like, you're never going to solve this riddle. It's never going to have a definitive answer. There are some things that have definitive answers. There are some things that are just stupid. Opening your marriage, if your destiny, is just a plain stupid thing. Mass migration at this stage is just a plain stupid thing. Printing money on a slow growth economy, well in excess of the GDP, is just a plain stupid thing. And what? I mean, those are things that we can say are stupid. Uh, what the motivations are of politicians will never be solved. I was in this debate with this guy called non-Zionism, and I was trying to say that the post-war consensus needed to end, and our obsession with Hitler needed to end. And this non-Zionism guy, who's actually is a Zionist, it's a joke name, or if he's not a Zionist, he fooled me because he's obviously, very invested in Israel. He said the most important thing we can determine whether whether if Hitler in his heart of hearts was truly anti-communist or just like anti-Jewish. We will never know the answer to that question. I can certainly guarantee you that most Nazis were predominantly anti-communist, and all the data backs this up. But we will never know the true heart of heart motivations of politicians. You won't know that when they're alive, and you won't know that when they're dead. And if your goal is to hinge your entire political action on these counterfactual questions, you're never going to do anything. I mean, I think it's good to have a theory about what that is, and you should express it when productive to other people. But I wouldn't break your brain over this. Gabriel Mundy for 25. Thank you very much. That's very generous. In the past, you referred to a set of 10 or 15 questions you'd ask boomer conservatives that they can't really answer. E.g., are the founding fathers racist? Could you briefly summarize the other ones? This is a Christian country. How can a Christian country be a Christian country if the majority of people are not Christian? Can a Christian country be a Christian country if the people who are running it, the elites, are not Christian? And if so, why are you allowing non-Christians into your leadership? Liberalism relied on having a certain number of virtues that were apparent in the population. All the founding fathers agreed to this. Are the virtues still present in this population? The answer is obviously no. So why are you leaning on liberalism when you have no expectation of a majority of people pursuing this? You have to re-educate the entire this is a separate question. Given that you acknowledge we have to re-educate the entire population of the West, how are you going to re-educate people? I've asked that to I've asked that to Neil Shenvi. I've asked that to Local Distance twice. I've asked that to Joel Berry. None of them have answers to how you're going to re-educate and demoralized population into being moral. They're like, oh, well, we'll have homeschooling. Only a minority of people homeschool. The majority of people are using public schools, and public schools are financed at the expense of the homeschoolers. Oh, people will just talk themselves out of it. No, they don't. Maybe a minority takes over the government like Christians did in, what was it, the 5th century or 6th century. And then it changes that way. And minority insurgencies do happen. But the majority of the population does not convert into that until that idea is in power. Like, no one's answered the question about education. No one's answered the question about morality or Christianity not being the primary feature of society. Nobody's asked the question about migration. This is another one that I asked every single one of them. Okay, so we have a creed. So this country is based on a creed. How do you test for creed? Like, if this country is based on creed, how do you make sure that the population that's coming in still has the creed? You just ask them a question. It's like the Vivek Ramaswamy. Your being an American is based on your score in this test. So congratulations, since ChatGPT has internet, ChatGPT is the best American citizen. Oh, perfect. And because Vivek Ramaswamy, because he studied for it, he's more American than the kid that didn't study for it. This is ridiculous. And to people who renounce these creeds, do they suddenly become non-American and get deported? This idea of a creedal nation in that sense is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And the second thing is true is that Joel Berry, and like they all do this. This is a harder question because they'll deny that they have ever done this. And it's hard to ask questions. But I can see on Twitter that Neil Shenvi and Joel Berry and Vocal Distance all believe in collective ethnic identities for a variety of other non-white people. And that these boundaries are obviously racial in part. And no one's saying, like, no one's going into Israel and going like, oh, where are the Swedish Jews? And if you don't have them, you're a racist. Or no one's going to Nigeria. And these norming Christians, they do not challenge like Nigerian identity or Pakistani identity or Chinese identity. No one's asking like, where are the white Chinese people? Or where are the black Japanese people or the black Koreans? Like, that's not a condition. Like, they don't have to prove that like they recognize these collective identities as organic fixtures that they have to mold their ministry of the gospel around, like features of the land. But for Europeans, it's the man up lecture. That's the other thing too. Like this Vivek Ramaswamy, like, oh, of course you can't be Indian if you're white, but America is special. Like, this isn't going to fly anymore. Like, you're so, like, boomers love this shit. Boomers eat this up. You're so special. You're so special that your identity, you get to give your identity and all its attendant privileges to everyone else. And then we get to lock you out of our identities and attendant privileges. Oh, you're so special. You get to give away all your wealth and identity, and we get to keep our own. Like, again, like I could invent more that are variations on that one, depending on who specifically I'm talking to. But like none of those questions, they can't answer questions about collectivities. They can't, propaganda, that's another one. Like, does propaganda work? I literally asked that to Vocal Distance, and his answer was no. Propaganda never works. This is the most ridiculous thing. And he's tried to, like, since then, he's tried to come up with like a steelman version of the propaganda does not work argument. And it's like ridiculous. Like, I can blow it out. I mean, I do respect Vocal Distance because he's sincere, and I want to make that clear. Like, I do like the guy, and I like that how well read he is, but he has the most autistic view imaginable. He doesn't like test his theories with like the smell test, and his story about how propaganda doesn't work does not pass the smell test. It's transparently ridiculous. And it does not explain how modern history or even ancient history works. And modern propaganda is a lot better than ancient propaganda by a large degree. Okay, Creeper Weirdo for $3 USA. Crunchy conservative sounds like those pro-natalist couples that wants to make who want to make about space travel or want to make religion about space travel or some crap. So you mean Simone and Malcolm Collins, who not coincidentally seem to have adopted from Rod Dreher his choice of glasses. These people are, I do respect, they've communicated with me, we've shared articles. I get a very weird vibe from the Collins. I don't know what to say about them. They have earned their unpopularity, and a lot of their popularity is driven from like really, really brutal usages of SEO and AI algorithm manipulation. And so I'm not so sure how organic their metrics even are, but I don't know. I don't know even what the dialectic looks like with the Collins. But yeah, crunchy conservative it sounds like, it sounds like something you put in your salad. Or and I guess aesthetically speaking, crunchy conservative look exactly like Simone and Malcolm Collins because Rod Dreher has their exact same fashion sense, which I guess they got from Harry Potter, at least as far as the glasses is concerned. Creeper Weirdo for $3 says Christianity about space travel or some crap. Well, last time I talked to the Collins, they were inventing their own religion. They weren't calling it Christianity. Did they make it about Christian? I mean, I guess I am marginally more sympathetic to that if I didn't feel incredibly manipulated. And that's the problem with the Collins is every time I talk to them, I feel like I'm being manipulated. I feel like they're gaming me. Like I don't feel like I'm being talked to. Like I am a person and we're in dialectic and we're trying to convince each other. I feel like they're trying to game like an AI, like I'm a bot, and they're trying to ply me so that they can get the right metrics out of me by like pushing the right button. I don't like being talked to like I'm a machine, and that's why my interactions have not been great with them. My interactions weren't great when like I wrote an article about them that was very, very popular, and they replied back. And my argument in the article was lots of people have tried to do what Malcolm and Simone Collins have done, and it's never worked. And their reply back to me on Twitter was, I understand your skepticism. No one's ever tried this before. So I can see why you might be very, very skeptical because this is so unusual what we're doing, indicating to me that they didn't fucking read my article, which means that they probably had like, Chat GPT give them a summary and potentially Chat GPT write the response. Like there was and after I corrected them, like they didn't reply anymore. Like they just tapped out. I mean, for such an embarrassing mistake to not even be like, oh lol, yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of forgot that. Well, we should talk about it. Something like that's what a human would say. I felt like I was getting some kind of like dispatch from like a secretary. But anyway, I won't talk about the Collins anymore. You can talk to them if you go to Kevin Dolan's natal conference, but I would love to talk to them, but I really want to be taught. I really want to them to talk to me like I'm a human and not like a gumball machine that they need to press the right buttons to get their algorithmic engagement up. Nerve AMV Maker for $5 said, "Did you ever watch Serial Experiments Lane? I feel like it's one of the 6 or 7 anime that really holds up, but it's one of the earliest works that turned the internet into a subject of existential horror. It feels very Landian to me." Yeah, Serial Experiments Lane is absolutely a Landian. It is a Gnostic Christian parable. And yeah, absolutely, that's at the top of my list. I literally mentioned it before you asked that question, Nerve AMV Maker. I can't remember who the director. I want to say Yoshitoshi Abe or something like that, but I'm probably way off on the name. But it's by this director who does like these contemplative animes. And his first one was this cyberpunk, the internet is destroying real life horror story that absolutely predicted the world that we're in right now. And it is incredibly Landian. And it tells the whole story as like a Gnostic parable, which is perfect because Serial Experiments Lane is one of the few animes that I remember holding up. And it's great. But I also really liked Haibane Renmei, which is again another like Christian adjacent parable. It seemingly portrays like limbo. Like that's what Haibane Renmei seems like it's portraying. Like souls stuck in limbo is what you are seeing in Haibane Renmei. And it's a beautiful story and it's beautifully animated. This is a 20-year-old memory. I haven't seen in 20 years. I remember it being very well animated in the artistic production. But the fact that it's animated, and again, always the thing with Japanese directors when they take on a Christian subject, I'm like, are you using this idea because you're struggling with it, or are you using this idea because you read about this in Dostoevsky and you think it's a really cool idea? Like the same way that I might have like an Oriental Buddhist monk, like a Shaolin monk, but I don't give a shit about Shaolin, like the Zen Buddhist philosophy. I just think like the Shaolin monk is cool. And I always wonder if these Christian themes that appear in Japanese movies, how authentic they are. With Akira Kurosawa, I really did believe that the Christian themes were like authentic and like grounded. But anyway, Alex Wegner for $3 USA. Any ideas on how to get out the Zoomer and other generations issued abandoned at Stalingrad syndrome? How to get out of the Zoomer abandoned at Stalingrad syndrome. I don't know what the syndrome is. You mean because you feel like you're abandoned as a generation? Well, I mean, that's really easy. Like organize, organize, organize. Find other young men, or specifically who you should be looking for would be men about the age of like younger millennials, people who are like more immediately your peers that share your values and that are a little bit more professionally established. Then, if you meet up with them and organize towards some greater purpose, I think the feelings of abandonment will abate. But don't be the slaves to the boomers, and don't play their whole game like I mean, by all means, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be as manly as you possibly can be, but don't like just don't do the Panda Express thing where you take a bad idea and you just grind at it until like you burn out in depression because there's no reward. Uh, Go forward with both eyes open. Ben White for $3. Academic Agent talks about religions as tools of empires and how more pluralistic religions were useful for getting everyone to follow the laws and pay their taxes. Yeah, but this is the ongoing debate between me and Academic Agent. Academic Agent doesn't understand that elites themselves are beholden to religions and their actions aren't explainable without reference to the religious belief itself. This is a feedback loop. To say that religions are created by elites is just anthropologically incorrect. Rome did not adopt, it wasn't like Constantine wasn't didn't wake up one day and say, like, we're going to, maybe Constantine did, and arguably that, but like, it wasn't like Constantine didn't like game out the next 1,000 years of Roman history and say, hey, look, like if we implement Christianity, we'll be able to establish a political formula in 400 years, and then there'll be Charlemagne, and then it will be a dominant political formula in Europe. That's not what happened. That is not what happened. Like Christianity came into effect because people believed it. And then political formulas organically grew up around that by people saying, how do I stay in power? And I also believe this at the same time. And then like there's a synthesis between the two and they come together and they form the political formula of a society. The academic agents like focus on only one of those two legs. I think it rarely blinds him to some like very, very observable historical realities that we're seeing right now. The elite is not independent from their religious devotion, period. Ben White for $3 USA. However, I feel the analysis misses the spiritual truth. Academic agents, that is. The men who made Western civilization great believed in Christ and his eternal end, and not in Christendom as a material or governing institution. I mean, yeah, that's 100%. Like, there was devout religious belief on the part of these actors. Like, that's just a fact. There were cynical actors too. And certainly, the civilizations themselves were forged in the name of God and not in the name of the civilizations themselves. Like civilizations aren't self-justifying. That's why asabiya is a thing, as Ibn Khaldun noted. The civilization has to have a motivating ethos. The civilizational ethos cannot be civilization. Just as the virtues that undergird your society can't be excellence. That's like Joe Barry hasn't gotten this memo yet. Like you can't make the civilizational virtues of a civilization a virtue itself. That is that's self-referential gobbledygook. It means absolutely positively nothing. And this is I don't know what to say about this. It's silly. Absolute Defender for $3 USA. One of the best conversations you ever had was with Arvel. Would you even consider having him on again? A conversation about religion would be insightful. Yeah, I remember having him on during COVID years. I hear he's all into intentional community building. I'd really like to talk to him about his intentional community building because that's a project that really, really, really fascinates me. I don't really want to talk to him about philosophy and Platonism. I think we'll just go back and forth forever on like abstract ideas that never touch reality in any meaningful way. Sam153 for $20 USA. Good evening, Dave. Just wanted to wish you a blessed Lent. Well, thank you very much. Very generous and also helps me get through the super chats. So I'm very, very, very grateful for that. Ben White says, I think why so many libs lost their minds at the Trump Zelensky conference is because they become highly idealistic. They believe that their ideal of liberal democracy is the truth, and the universe is obligated to defend it because it is the truth. Yeah, they're religious. They do not realize that this is a religion for them. They don't understand that when they say we want to spread democracy and liberty, they're saying the same thing as when I say I want to spread Christianity. And if it was Christianity that they were defending in Ukraine and not liberal democracy, they would immediately see the problems in their approach. Ben White again says, however, when faced with the fact that it costs literal blood and lives to defend liberal democracy, and that Trump wants a lot of money to defend Ukraine, their worldview simply cannot comprehend it. Well, I mean, that certainly is the case. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that Trump really should put peace first. I do realize that the mineral rights are a thing that the United States needs for its defense, but I think showcasing that in his public pronouncements is a little bit gauche, and it insults the very. People are naturally going to regard war as only justifiable in religious terms, and so no one's ever going to accept a war for gold. Even the conquistadors couldn't do that. They had to always justify their expansion and literal grabbing of Incan and Aztec gold as being first and foremost about spreading the gospel. This idea that you're going to make like a calculation about mineral wealth part of your political formula for war is just it's a naturally feeble political formula in human terms. Vegas 77 for $10 says, I got the dream petroleum engineering job, and now when I'm not in the field for weekdays, I have the income to attract a wife, only to discover that money is essentially of no use to attract women in my college educated peer group anymore, and they already spend months per year internationally. How? Well, look, I have no idea about your specific group. Money is always useful for women. And if you have, look, just buy a house, just like buy a house, like do that seriously, like buy your own house, like get a mortgage that's payable in your year, and then like make new friends and make new friends that have contact with other groups of women. Make sure that you're reasonably in shape. If you have a house, you're reasonable, like a real house, you're reasonably in shape and you've got a job and women are coming over for dinner parties. God, I can't believe there's no way women aren't going to fall for that eventually. Like once you have the resources, you will be able to teach yourself to develop confidence. And once you have confidence and resources and access to a community that will view your like I guess there's an even more component. The women have to regard your moral system as something that is roughly equivalent to their own for you to be a prospect, unless you're really really rich, in which case they might be convinced to abandon their moral framework. So just avoid explicitly progressives. Go for centrist women and in moderate conservative women. And if you have your finances taken care of and you have your life in order and you're inviting them over to dinner parties at your house and you have the confidence and the control, I can't imagine you'll have problems to attract a wife in those circumstances. A Straightal Assassin for $3 USA. I feel like you're more misogynistic than you let on. This is a safe space, Dave. A safe space for women or a safe place for misogyny? I have been notably a little bit more misogynistic in the last year. Circumstances have led me to some conclusions about the political limitations of how people prefer to approach politics, and that's something wrong with women. It just means that the future of politics is masculine. It just is, and some women will be able to temporarily operate in that masculine mode, and most of them will not. And that's just how it is. And, it's nothing wrong about anybody. Ben White for $3 USA. If Vegas 77, the future affluent Texan oil man, can't attract a wife, then what hope is there for the white collar pleb like me? If so, it's Joe over. Or perhaps it's so back. I don't know, one of the two. Well, I don't know, Ben White. Like, just get your life in more or less order financially. Make sure you have a reasonable income and then get a plan. I literally wrote a Substack article about this about 2 months ago, and I thought I laid out, like, the things you can do pretty easily, or at least how to avoid the things you shouldn't be doing. Alex Wegner for $3 USA. A quick rundown on 1, recognizing a mistake or cope pattern and correcting the pattern. 2, knowing a missed opportunity. Or 3, how to keep up with relevant issues. Okay, so you want a quick rundown on recognizing a mistake or a cope pattern? Um, I mean, you so a cope pattern usually means that you're turning away from some hard reality that's staring you in the face. So every time you kind of turn away from a necessary reality, and you can feel yourself doing, there's some topics that I don't like talking about either in the contexts. And so that's how you feel yourself coping. Now the question is, are you prepared to deal with the worst case scenarios, right? So like if you do not like race realism or HBD as a concept, are you prepared for that being true? And if you're thinking that way, well then I think then you've responsibly handled your hangups in a way that is fruitful. Knowing you missed an opportunity. I don't know for what, like for discourse? That's a little bit vague. And how to keep up with relevant issues. Well, I mean, relevant issues are things that talk about real political power, who will rule, and what values will rule. And fruitful political conversations ultimately lead to types of behaviors that allow the values that you prefer to come into more political power and to thus create a better way for yourself and your descendants and their relationship with God in the future. That's what makes a topic relevant. And if you're in that frame, which antinatalism is definitionally not, and therefore automatically excluded in my frame, then we can discuss whether any given issue is a relevant one or not. And you can see the frame. A lot of feminist framing is just naturally irrelevant by the way it's framed. Asteroidal assassin. Leftists know there is a void in sexual norms, but since they're leftists, they crack down on shit like a 17-year-old dating a 20-year-old or any sort of art that depicts a beautiful woman. Yeah, I mean, this is something I really want to hammer this here. Like sexual norms and sexual ethics. This is the most obvious element about the modern world. And I just want to hammer, to the extent that I can get progressives into a conversation, I just want to hammer them on this again and again and again and again and again until they finally acknowledge that the sexual norms need to be real, they need to be socially enforced minimally, and they need to extend to something that is beyond simple choice. This is the conversation that needs to happen. This is the conversation that needs to happen now with the left. And I don't know why we aren't having it. Well, I know why we're not having it. We're not having it because the left refuses to have it. Creeper Weirdo for $3 says, I do not know if anyone asked you this, but did you see Academic Agent's video on putting the woke away? He critiqued your this is a war of faith, war of belief meme, albeit not directly. There is a conversation there, I think. Yeah, I kind of already went over this. Academic Agent does not understand that this is a feedback loop. This is a dialectic between power and religion and belief. And it is not simply power. Power does not autonomously create belief. That is not how religions came about historically. It's just not true. Rather, the force of religion hits the force of pure power, and in the process of synthesis comes into a new political formula. That is how it has always worked. That's what Thomas Becket was. That's what the Reformation was. That is what the Enlightenment in the 20th century post-war consensus is. It is a war of belief because the changes of belief necessarily create a circulation in the elite and a circulation of the powerful. And the change begins with the belief first. Most power is bottom down, but to the extent that it's not bottom down, it wells up from the subject of belief. Ben White for $3 USA. Thanks for the stream tonight, Dave, and thanks for calling me out on that darn anime girls and carbs. I wish you and your family a holy Lent. Well, thank you very much, Ben White. I appreciate it. Charlie Maki for $25. Well, thank you very much. Good evening. I hope you and yours well. Do you think video games work or could work as a medium for worthwhile stories and art, or are they doomed to be a kind of pornography? Is there a kind of story video game that video games work better to tell? I loved your video essay on BioShock Infinite and other writings. Well, thank you. I think BioShock Infinite was one of my best of the video essay era, and there was one that I made after that that never got released. That someone's told me that I really should release. That I value the advice of, and I'd have to write a second part to it. But yeah, I guess the problem with video games is like they're hard to communicate ideas because the ideas are such a small part of them. So like Final Fantasy Tactics, I think is one of the best anime romances that there is. It's also part of a video game that takes 60 hours to complete. And the actual story is 2 hours, I think, maximum. If you considered the fights like cutscenes and you fast forwarded, you could probably get through it in 2 hours. But you can't beat that game without grinding. How am I supposed to give someone a non-video game player like my wife would like the story of Final Fantasy Tactics? I can't like, hey honey, watch this, play the 60-hour video game. Like, that's not going to happen. And the problem with like BioShock is that's the last AAA video game I played. And it's just so clear to me that the video game BioShock, first of all, I mean, BioShock, the story is kind of disgusting if you think about it for more than like 3 seconds. I mean, it's very poignant when you experience it because the characters are so well drawn and the moral problem is so well posed. But if you stop and think about it, like replay the message in your mind 4 or 5 times, you're like, oh, that's a disgusting story. What the hell was the director thinking? Like, did he have any sympathy for the characters? Did he have any understanding of the ideas he was grappling with? And the conclusion has to be no. And you know, this is a very hateful movie, even if the characters were kind of lovingly made. But BioShock, that's not the point here. Like the point is that BioShock Infinite, the game, made BioShock Infinite, the movie, a worse movie. Just obviously so. Like I said this in my review of BioShock. Like one moment you're having this conversation with the female character that's like very, very heartfelt, and like in the next scene you like take a radial saw to someone's face. This is like no one's like, there's a total artistic disjoint. I do not know how you can make video games art, but every time I've seen video games as art, it has absolutely detracted from the experience of the art. Society Man for $5. The demons in Firion are portrayed not just as demonic, but as beings that use men's empathy as okay. Yeah, I remember this too. That beings that use men's empathy as a weapon against them. Firion goes on multiple rants about how peaceful coexistence with them is impossible. Even is Evan is Worf called it fascist. Well, I can't believe Evan is Worf is not a parody account. I guess like Evan likes Worf. Is the account. I can't believe this is not a parody account. But yeah, that's one that is absolutely, maybe I should watch it. But I that is people have drawn that aspect out of it. It's that weaponized empathy is part of Farion's plot. And I guess that's good because weaponized empathy needs to be a facet of our intellectual discourse going forward. The good faith argument has to be understood first. Creeper Weirdo for $3 USA. I've actually been binge watching Home Math. Very interesting stuff, even though it's stuff that I had figured out. Yeah, I like the diagrams. Still, it's necessary though, and it helps a lot of young men. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like Home Math. What can I say? Very talented communicator. Very cute drawings. I love them. Very snappy content. Gets the idea across really quickly. Brilliant guy. I've heard every one of these ideas a million billion times. I myself personally, I only watch Home Math for the craft of short video making. I don't need to have people tell me this about sexual market dynamics. I know it upside down and backwards. It's pure indulgence at this stage. But yeah, it's great. It's a great little channel, if not incredibly repetitive. Nervan V Maker for $5 USA. I think the reason anime is philosophically so unfulfilling is that most of it is effectively young adult fiction, which is the most shallow type of literature. Anime seems to be more profound because the aesthetic of its animation is way better than young adult prose. Yeah, Nervan V Maker, I agree with you. But then you have those examples that I just gave you, like Serial Experiments Lane. I kind of wish that this was like a Korean live action horror movie because then I could show it to more people. I can't get people to watch Serial Experiments Lane because it's anime and because of like its episodic way that the thing is structured. The medium itself has gotten a bad rap to the point that people give the shows less of a chance because it's anime. And like I don't make the rules. Like I really wish this whole waifu stuff didn't like take off, but it has. And now everyone associates anime with kind of like this self-indulgent young adult fiction but for men thing where the point of the anime is to create like these cute situations where you can live out hyper idealized romantic fantasies, which is like the media equivalent of eating fast food. Yeah, you nailed it. Creeper Weirdo says, "You got to wear that hat, Dave. You should wear it for a while and stream too until you pick the subject of the stream. It's going to happen. Turleyville isn't a prepositional town. It's real." Wear what hat? You mean the beanie that I wore like a few weeks ago? I guess I could wear a beanie. People would assume that I was bald though. I guess I have a little bit of a bald spot here in my middle age, but that's not to say much. That's most men get it, I guess, eventually. Say No to Soma, a great name. I love it. For $5 says, thoughts on education. Looking at pre-K for my son, no Catholic school in the area. There's a Waldorf school, but I believe it's a gender woke and kind of pagan, so leaning away, though my wife loves it. Homeschool probably is a no-go. Seems like no good options. Look, I would just, like you're talking about early school here, right? You don't have to worry about ideology until about second or third grade if you make sure that your teachers are not ideologues. So, like, look at the Waldorf school and look at the teacher. If you have a Waldorf school and the teacher is like not a crazy person and the curriculum is fine, then I think it's pretty safe. Like, we send our kid to a Protestant school, but like, really play the teacher. Like, I mean, you're not like like when you're shopping for education for your kid, you do not need like an option that's good for all kids. You just need to make sure that the individual place you're sending your kid now is good for the time that they will be in that school. So if it's just preschool, that's just 1 year, you just need to make sure that your individual teacher is acceptable. Like, take them out to dinner, talk to them. I don't know. Like, the teacher matters more than the institution that runs it. Like, institutions are made up out of people, and it's the teacher that makes it, not the leader, not the institution. You can have paused teachers inside Catholic schools. This is what Catholics don't seem to realize, and that happens more than people would like to admit. So if you do that, and the institution only really starts to matter later on, and especially in places like higher education, because at that point they circulate the peer group, and so the institution is making more decisions. Until you get to high school, it's really a kid only has one teacher a year for the most part. Wow, Matt B for 100. Wow, thank you so much. I finally got a job after several years of being grossly underpaid. I wanted to send you some appreciation for all the time I've been listening, but I'm unable to afford to send you anything. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really do appreciate it. It goes to support my family and to keep this podcast running. You're really flattering me right now. That is amazing. I wish I could give you more. And hopefully, I'll get this next essay series out the door by the end of next week. So the second installment minimally by the end of this weekend, and then the third installment sometime around next weekend. And then I'll get on to the other projects for this year, which hopefully will be bigger and better, not just book reviews. Toad for $15 USA. I'm blessed to have in real life friends who are technically smart people with shitlib politics. How does one best help such people see reality without dynamiting those relationships? Try to find issues that they agree with you on that are also core reactionary issues, like family formation or birth rate, or things like things like community building or birth rate or family formation, like things like that that you can both agree that this is good. Or alternatively, try to bond over something that liberals like that is implicitly reactionary, like Tolkien. Tolkien's a great example of this. I love Tolkien for these purposes. If you can make your relationship with your progressive friends revolve around Tolkien, it will pay dividends in the future. I can't think of another one. I mean, it used to be that progressives liked all sorts of stuff from the past that was reactionary, like Wagner or any number of things like Graham Greene would be another good example. Like it used to be the progressives like all sorts of things that were implicitly like Dostoevsky, another person who's undeniably like right wing in his like spiritual perspective on the universe. Like progressives loved that. And if you can portray your beliefs as if they're you kind of coming to terms with volkishness, with like earthiness, like with the questions of Dostoevsky, and that they're sincere, then I think everything else kind of unfolds from that. Creeper Weirdo for $3 says, the MAGA hat. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Okay. Well, do I even own a MAGA hat? I guess so. Oh, well, I have one more super chat, the last one of the night, I guess. Geos Goen into Locker says, hello, Dave. Every time I hear you talk on anime, you seem to sell it too short. You should talk to Isaac Young or Solion about it. On that note, I'm drawing my own manga. It takes like yours to discourage me. I am doubting if I should pursue it given that the flaws you assign it, whether earned or not. Well, I mean, like it's not the fault of anime that people ruined it. I mean, like by all means, try to resurrect the genre, and maybe manga is still a good art form. I'm just saying, like look, maybe like a manga might be actually a good thing if you could create a really good manga that was like short enough to. I think that's actually a really great idea, Geos. Like a manga that had a really, really poignant and spiritually meaningful story inside of it that was self-contained in a volume that you could give somebody that wasn't like, like Berserk that's like 10 volumes long. That might be actually really useful to redeem the genre. But I'm saying that like, you have to be aware that this is an uphill battle, right? Like I didn't make the rules. Like I wish like Catholicism, it's an uphill battle because of the sex abuse scandal. Like that's just my reality. And Catholicism is one of the things that I can't walk away from. And therefore like that is the reality that I am I have to deal with, and it's something that but by all means, like slowly, Catholicism's reputation is going to heal, and perhaps the art form of manga is also going to heal too. But I would recommend perhaps making a variation on the style of the manga, so people know that it's something different than the kind of shonen stuff that you see, the harem anime. Like the harem anime has really been the driver of anime's bad reputation in the modern world. But there we go. So guys, thank you for joining me. It's been a great stream. Less on YouTube, but way, way more on X. So this will be the standard going forward. We'll be streaming both on X and on YouTube for the foreseeable future. I will, obviously, this is published as a podcast recording on my Substack for paid members. It's one of the few things that I put behind the paywall. And I'm trying to get this out a week after I make the episode live. And in the meantime, I always end these episodes. So if you're joining me for the first time on the X app, I always end these by reading a psalm, and I now have it on my entropy. I cut and paste it. I Since it's Ash Wednesday, a classic, the most famous psalm ever written, the most famous psalm in the book of Psalms, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths. For his name's sake, even though I walk through the desert valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overfloweth. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell forever in the house of the Lord. Well, thank you very much, people, for joining me for Fiddler's Green podcast number 56. I'll see you again in another 2 weeks. And in the meantime, have a blessed Strove Tuesday and a wonderful or holy Lent in the